And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network, here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. The Naked City, the city of 1,000 stories. We're going to tell quite a few tonight. Let's get right down to it. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Take a moment, please like us. And of course, because this issue never seems to go away, or all anti-billionaire baseball boys club, apolitical, Paw Sox feed at Pawtucket is home. Just this other day, I posted a story about, we're going to discuss in one of our next segments, about a certain baseball park in Camden where the good burghers of the city of Camden got to spend $1 million tearing down the multimedia stadium they just recently bought that was, like every other minor league baseball stadium, going to, in fact, save the world as we know it. But we've got several people on the hot plate tonight. Joining us live is someone whose organization is no stranger to the Coalition Talk Radio. And of course, I'm talking about the Goldwater Institute. After he's off the air later on, I'll talk a little bit more about the Goldwater Institute. As always, appointment reading, make it your homepage. It's a wonderful organization that encompasses both litigation, sample legislation, think tank, criminal investigation. I'll often wax poetic about the Goldwater Institute because, quite frankly, they do a marvelous job of simultaneously supplanting the mainstream media as we know it with original reporting done by some of the best reporters in the far West, adding to it a think tank element, advocating for really bleeding edge libertarian ideas, while at the same time providing us with real world applications through what we often talk about here when they're on the air, and that of course is sample legislation, which they're able to port around the country. Timothy Sandifer, however, is joining us for the very first time. He's the Vice President for Litigation. Amongst other things, he holds the Duncan Chair in Constitutional Government. Besides litigating important cases for economic liberty, private property rights, and free speech, he's also a published author. At some time in the near future, I hope to have him on the air just to talk about a couple of the books he's written, not the least of which include The Constants of the Constitution, The Right to Earn a Living, and of course, The Permission Society, which is, I think, worthy of an hour's conversation in and of itself. Mr. Sandifer, welcome to the Coalition. We're very proud to have you join us for the very first time tonight. Now, you know, there's actually two situations ongoing in the world of the Goldwater Institute this week. First of all, you know, clearly there's been litigation over the last couple of years where we've attempted to separate, if you will, the rights of the individual from the what seems to be at one point the preordained rights of labor unions to force membership to advocate politically, perhaps in direct contrast to the members' views, and have sort of a stranglehold economically by requiring dues payments. Now, clearly, in the wake of Janus, that is, you know, that type of, well, let's just say that's exploding right around us. Now, you folks are involved with litigation in front of the United States Supreme Court that's going to take that into a brave new world. And of course, we're talking about the world of lawyers, bar associations, the courts. Tell us what's going on.
We filed this lawsuit as a follow-up to those cases like the Janus case that involved compelling people to support public employee unions, their political activities, even if the people don't want to. Well, lawyers face a very similar situation in many states, most states in the country. Lawyers are required to join a bar association or something like that, a trade association, an organization, and then fund that organization, which goes out and takes political activities or takes political positions and engages in political activities and so forth. And so the same principle, we argue, ought to apply. Unfortunately, we lost that case before the lower court, so we went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and what happened this week was that the Supreme Court said that the courts that had ruled against us were wrong and ordered them to reconsider this situation in light of the Janus ruling. So that's a really positive development that shows that the court sees the same principle at the heart of both.
How, you know, this is sort of the toss-up question of the year for me. what type of power do bar associations have in terms of everything from judiciary nominations to, well, just how how cases proceed on on a local level?
Yeah, and I think that's really important. A lot of people hear about this case and they're like, well, free speech rights, lawyers, I'm sure I'm fine with that, but what's the big deal? And it needs to be emphasized that lawyers exercise a disproportionate influence in our society. These bar associations, both at the state and the federal level, everybody is familiar with the ABA, but there's also the California bar and at the state level, that sort of thing. They exercise an outside influence on things like judicial appointments or tort reform or other issues that really matter to the administration of justice in this country. And, they tend to be on the left, politically speaking. The ABA rates judicial nominees and routinely rates conservative judges or libertarian judges as unqualified, even though they're completely qualified, just because the ABA doesn't like their political views and that sort of thing. And they do all of this with money that's taken out of the paychecks of lawyers, often against their will.
So you have the same conundrum that you have even, say, the folks who are employed by the local Department of Public Works. You've got, you've got essentially the coercive use of government as a form of exercising a tariff on individuals where that money is redirected, sometimes in direct opposition to their own personal views, and this extra legal authority that bar associations have throughout the land compels them to do so, and if not fully compliant, to do so at the risk of literally their own careers.
Exactly, and it's very similar. The excuses that are given for this are certainly going to be familiar to any libertarian, and that is, the government comes in and compels you to do this, and it says, well, this is for the protection of the general public. And that's not true. We know it's not true because the state can protect people against incompetent lawyers without forcing lawyers to join the bar association. 19 states, including New York, which probably has the most lawyers of any state, these states regulate the practice of law and require people to pass an exam and all that sort of thing, punish people for doing bad things without compelling them to join a bar association.
And so, at the same time, how pervasive is this through professionalized trade associations? I mean, because you've got the AICPA as well, which on the state level has got this similar extra legal authority to operate, and take something as simple as some of the reforms that, quote unquote, and I'll use the coalition air quotes, some of the reforms advocated by the Consumer Protection Office at the federal level. If these are in fact supported by a AICPA office, and or for example, the ongoing attempt to professionalize certified financial planners, again, you've got a political wing using money to advocate on behalf of politicized decisions with no input whatsoever from the membership.
Yeah, or directly contrary to what the members believe in. I mean, you look at those public employee unions that you mentioned, for instance, and these public employee unions often take a very far left political position, and yet public employees themselves are often conservative and don't agree with those views, and yet they're forced to subsidize them, which is just wrong.
Well, on what grounds did the lower court, particularly given the strength of the Janus decision, on what grounds did the lower court deny this case?
Oh, well, there's two things, and it's actually rather amusing in a dark way. So the court said that the state has authority, it has discretion to decide for itself how to regulate the legal profession. So if it decides to force you to join an association, then that's perfectly fine. And then there's another issue that I think this is particularly nasty. What happens is every year a lawyer gets a bill from the bar that says you have to pay these dues in order to keep your bar license. And these bills are often in California or in North Dakota, which is where we filed our lawsuit. In these states, these bills are written in an incredibly deceptive and dishonest way, in a manner that's designed purposely to fool people into paying money to the State Bar Association that they don't actually have to pay. What they say is you have to pay, $500 in order to keep your bar license. And then when you scroll down and you look at the fine print, it says, oh, by the way, if you don't want to support our political activities, you can deduct $50 or something like that.
Right.
Well, if any private business ever did anything like that, you can bet that the Attorney General would sue them into the ground for deceptive trade practices. But it's okay for the State Bar to do that? So we made that argument to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, and the court ruled against us, saying, no, this is still voluntary, because after all, you are the one who takes out the checkbook and writes out the check and sends it into the State Bar. So that's voluntary. Well, I don't see how that's really any more voluntary than somebody defrauding you on the street and then you handing over your money because you've been defrauded and then saying, oh, no, it was really voluntary because you chose to give me the money. You didn't choose to give the money. You were fooled into it. You were defrauded. So that was the theory that the court below said. It said, well, no, this is really voluntary in the end. And so I think what's going to happen now, that they've been ordered to reconsider that in light of this new Janus decision, they have, one of two ways that they can go. Either they can say, no, this is still good enough, or they can admit what we all know to be the case, which is that this system is designed to essentially coerce people into supporting these bar associations against their will.
Now, I'm always fascinated by the backstory. You've got two individuals who are involved in this lawsuit as plaintiffs. What was their compelling issue, if you will, or what was the moment that sort of, if you will, pushed them over the edge, where they had to respond?
It's very similar to what happened in Janus or in the other union cases. It was a guy, in this case, a guy named Arnold Fleck, who's a lawyer in North Dakota, and he found that he disagreed with the position that was being taken on his behalf, as you say, in air quotes, by this organization. And that's just what happened in the union cases. And Mark Janus didn't like what was going on in his case, and Rebecca Friedrich didn't like what was happening with her money in her case. In all of these cases, individual dissenters who have particular points of view and have the First Amendment right to express that point of view were being forced to subsidize positions they disagreed with. Now, in Arnold Fleck's case, he supported a ballot initiative that the State Bar opposed. And it took his money, and it ran advertisements, and it ran a political campaign, and it took political positions. And when he found out about it, he said, hey, you're doing that with my money, and you don't have the right to force me to subsidize political expression I disagree with. So we went to court on his behalf, and we've been, it's been a long, slow road. We've been slugging it out for quite a while now, and we're going to have to, it's probably going to be another year that this case goes on. But all of this just because he's taking a stand for a principle. That's a very rare thing, and it's really admirable, I think.
Well, and something we're going to dive into in a second, equally admirable is your willingness to take this case on. Now, in a situation like this is rather unique because you've essentially got the entire legal establishment. And I'm not trying to be overly dramatic. As someone who is a veteran watcher of late-night TV, watching, all sorts of, true crime shows, and being an expert because I've watched every Law and Order episode imaginable. But you literally are challenging the foundation of the entire legal system and how it self-polices itself. I mean, the finances for it are to a certain degree at risk here. Who is actually arguing for the defendant in this case?
Yeah, well, it's a state agency, it's a state bar it combines the activities of an ordinary regulator
right.
with the activities that you would expect of a labor union. It puts those two things together so that although it's on one hand a government agency, it's also engaged in lobbying and so forth. And you're right, we're talking about a lot of money and a lot of political power from the states where this goes on, particularly California. I'm a member of the California Bar, and there are, there's, I would guess, 150,000 lawyers in California, 100,000 lawyers, something like that.
Right.
There's lots of lawyers, and that's a lot of money with a lot of political influence in a state that has a lot of people and a lot of money for lawyers to get. So they're engaged in a lot of lobbying and a lot of political activity, and they finance it by money taken out of people's paycheck against their will. On this point, I always think it's so funny that the left makes such a big deal about it's always the Koch brothers. Oh, such and such is funded by the Koch brothers and all this sort of thing. Well, at least the Koch brothers voluntarily give their money to political campaigns. On the other hand, are groups that take their money directly against people's will and use it for political campaigns, supposedly for our own good. So yeah, this is definitely a challenge to a very powerful and well-entrenched interest group nationwide, and I think they are paying a lot of attention to it.
Yeah, and by the way, for the record, Tim, I am the chairman of the Rhode Island Libertarian Party, and we have yet to ever receive a shekel from the Koch brothers. And if I could put the word out, if somehow it filters up to them, we are willing to take their money. Now, and I don't usually get into the media aspect of this, but, obviously the prior case, Janice, was in the news everywhere. It's interesting to me how media reacts to individual stories, and I'm not. I'm very pro-media, very media supportive. I'm not a fake news guy. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. But I'm wondering, given the pervasive nature of state bar associations, A, is there a level of panic, and B, do you think that in any way the reporting on this is influenced by the, shall we say, the special nature of the defendant in this case?
Yeah, I very well could be. Now, this case still has a ways to go, so it's possible that we'll get more attention going forward. But I do think that the lawyers, have a real connection with the media, and I think the media is naturally inclined to take the side of the organized legal community, that is, these bar associations that we're challenging. And so it's to be expected that they would be skeptical toward us, toward our legal positions. And that they tend to buy at face value the argument that, oh, well, we have to force people to join bar associations in order to regulate the legal profession, even though that's not true. Even though, of course, the state could still prosecute somebody for doing something wrong as a lawyer or whatever without necessarily forcing them to join one of these associations. But I do think that, yeah, there's naturally going to be an inclination to be opposite us legally, as far as the media is concerned.
Now, in this case, and again, forgive me, I'm not an expert. I literally just play one on the radio. You've applied for a writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court for this, or was it?
Yes, and the court granted that writ and remanded the case to the 8th Circuit. So, although that is a decision of the Supreme Court, it's not your usual sort of thing where everybody goes in and makes their arguments in front of the justices and you get a written opinion. Mm-hmm. What this is this is an order from the court telling the court below that it was wrong and ordering them to rethink the case. So that means that our next step is to go back and re-argue the case all over again in front of the 8th Circuit, which, that could be in St. Louis or something. And then once they decide that, then almost certainly whichever side loses is going to ask the Supreme Court once again to take the case. And it's very possible that we could go back.
Right. Folks, if you're just joining us, Tim Sandifer of the Goldwater Institute, certainly no stranger to the coalition, and we're always grateful for their participation in our programming, is joining us. We're talking about litigation that is essentially an extension, if you will, of Janus, taking the Janus decision right into the heart of the legal system of America. The question begs, and we always try to do whatever we can to raise your profile here in the Northeast. You're talking about a significant investment in time, legal expenses by some of the great legal minds of America when you're operating at this level for this type of issue with this type of exposure. How do you support these activities as an organization?
Yeah, so the Goldwater Institute, like our sister organizations, does not charge our clients for our legal representation. So we're supported by donations from people who voluntarily give us money, as opposed to these bar associations that force people to give them their money.
Right.
So we're donor supported, and we've been representing Mr. Flegg. You talk about the stick-to-itiveness, that resolve. Poor Mr. Flegg. I really admire his ability to basically put his life on hold in many respects for, gosh, it's been at least a year and a half that this case has been going on. And that's very similar to the story of people like Mark Janus or Rebecca Friedrichs. In fact, I was just last night I spent here in Phoenix. We had Ms. Friedrichs come out and speak, and she was the plaintiff in one of the public employee union cases a few years ago. That was the case that got put on hold because Justice Scalia died. Mm-hmm. And, here's a woman whose career as a teacher has been largely destroyed because of the hostility, the retaliation, the ostracism that she faces from members of these public employee unions, simply because she's standing up for herself and saying, you know, if you want to believe one thing, that's perfectly fine, but I believe a different thing, and so I shouldn't be forced to pay your bills. And that's been enough to basically put her on the outs and ruin her job as a teacher. It's really remarkable how these unions persist in their political power, as you said, through coercion or intimidation.
Right. Now, only got a couple minutes here because I know you've got a tight schedule tonight. I can't not ask you about what's going on just up the road here in Massachusetts. You folks made a major announcement yesterday. You're asking the U.S. Supreme Court, again, in separate litigation, to level the campaign finance playing field. Now, this is equal as remarkable. By the way, on an editorial note, what I always say about organizations like yourself and Reason, there's about a half a dozen organizations like you guys that are kind of our heroes here. And one of the reasons is because you answer questions that really no one is asking. So in Massachusetts, we've got a situation where, once again, the politically affiliated organizations of labor unions are able to donate money. Yet, once again, we've got this, quite frankly, a built-in institutionalized prejudice against other organizations. What's going on in Massachusetts?
Yeah, so this is a case where the state law says that labor unions are allowed to donate money to political campaigns, but private businesses are not, and they aren't even allowed to contribute to a political action committee.
Right.
So this is not all that unusual. We had a similar case not long ago in Kentucky, which also had this rule on its books, and we won that case. The Kentucky federal court ruled that was unconstitutional and struck that discrimination down. I mean, you talk about a violation of free speech rights to say that one side of a political position is allowed to support its campaigns by donating to people it agrees with, but the other side of the political position is not allowed to support its campaigns and donate money to its candidates. Talk about creating an unbalanced playing field. So we sued over this similar issue in Massachusetts, and unfortunately the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ruled against us. So we've asked the U.S. Supreme Court to take the case, and we'll see what they do.
Right. That's got nationwide implications as well. I mean, here in Little Rhodey, as we call it, I can tell you from personal experience that obviously, you know, the same law holds true. Companies are not allowed, to donate to political campaigns. In fact, even political action committees that are legitimate PACs in other states have to register with our state in order them to donate. As you can imagine, the economies of scale are such that the large liberal left-leaning PACs around the country, Emily's List, people like that, by definition have the scale and the scope to advocate for their people and are registered in Rhode Island. If you're the Freedom PAC, we'll just make one up, and you're just a couple of freedom-loving folks in Arizona, and you want to help out my next guest, Bill Hunt, become the next General Assemblyman for District 68 here in Little Rhodey, you can't do it. So, I mean, it's just terrible. I guess the final thought for tonight is you are, let's just say you're successful with the Supreme Court case. You get the writ of certiorari. You're able to argue it before the Supreme Court. Then that precedent is set. What happens around the rest of the country? Are you able to then just port it equally? Do you have to find someone who has suffered damages to be a plaintiff and resue? How does that all work?
Yeah, well, I mean, every case opens the door to the next case. You know, there's the old saying that every time you find a missing link, it creates two gaps, and that's certainly the truth in the law. So if the Supreme Court took the case and ruled in our favor, I think it would set a precedent that says you're not allowed to treat labor unions as if they're the true spokesman for the working man, while corporations are some sort of evil, alien, outside influence that has to be censored and stifled. And I think that would be very important to our legal system, because right now there's a great deal of imbalance in how the political debate goes on in this country, because labor unions are favored. Public employee unions have been favored for a great deal of time. They're given these special favors where they're allowed to automatically take money out of people's paychecks, whether they want that or not. On the other side are people who advocate for smaller government who don't have those advantages and are forced instead to do what everybody ought to do, which is to ask people, are you willing to donate to my campaign or my cause or whatever it is? And I think if people were allowed to speak their own minds and support causes that they actually believed in, I think you would have a very different political climate than you have today.
Absolutely, because the ultimate tragedy here is that the coercive power of a government to tax is leveraged in such a way so that at multiple steps along that quote-unquote compact that exists between, shall we say, the governed and the government, they're able to leverage the tax at each step along the way to fuel, in a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will, for lack of a better term, their own success. And to say that it's destructive is an understatement. You know, we just had a situation here in Rhode Island where we finally came out with using the same testing system as the nation's leading school system, Massachusetts. And people here were shocked to find out that, well, in many cases we're anywhere from 20 to 30 plus points behind in most basic test scores from the state next door. And that type of power that's wielded by public employee unions, all right, to control situations so that, you know, there's no availability for either protest through the electoral process or, you know, realignment of priorities through an economic process, because quite frankly, so many of these state legislatures are controlled by the very people who are using your tax dollars to elect them. They're stymied at every step of the way. And you know, there's this growing sense of frustration and injustice associated with this. And that's why my hat's off to you folks, because at its most primal level, you are changing the way that these people fund themselves. And as a result, quite frankly, that's possibly the only way we're going to be disruptive and change things here in this country. You know, it's not unlike, and I'll use the analogy, it's not unlike going after a drug dealing cartel. You stifle them at the street level, you stifle their economics, and guess what? All of a sudden, the playing field is leveled, and you've got a chance to defeat them. It's the RICO factor come to life, if you will, politically. How can folks, you know, keep in touch with your organization? How can folks contribute? Give us the website. Give us the elevator pitch, if you will, for the, you know, as if we haven't amply over the past 2 years demonstrated the value that Goldwater Institute provides to the nation.
Yeah, you can keep an eye on all the stuff that we do at our blog on our website. That's indefenseofliberty.blog. Very simple to remember. You know, Barry Goldwater gave that famous speech about extremism and the defense of liberty is no vice. So just go to indefenseofliberty.blog, and you can keep an eye on our daily activities. And then our main website is goldwaterinstitute.org, and you can find out how to support us if you're inclined to do so, and find out more information about all the different cases that we're litigating and all the different projects we're doing.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining us on a holiday season Friday night. If you will, Tim Sandifer, he's the Vice President of Litigation for the Goldwater Institute. Compelling case law taking place as we speak, advancing the cause of liberty. Shall we say, a serious attempt to neuter the financial monopoly, if you will, that private labor unions and even in many cases professional organizations have in controlling the flow of money, and as a result having an unfair advantage in the free market of ideas. Thank you again for joining us, and I'd love to have you on sometime, perhaps right after the holidays, just to talk for an hour about some of the books you've written. Compelling stuff.
That'd be great.
And just, I think it's very important to get that word out here to, let's just say, when it comes to liberalism, socialism, we are here in Rhode Island in the belly of the beast. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful night. Folks, we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center. Joining me in just a second is the man of the hour. He's been everywhere this week, coming to you by newsprint, by radio, by television, smoke signals. If there's an anguish wail that you've heard rising above the skyline of Providence, a collective browbeating, if you will, a collective smoting, chainmail, Self-flagellation, yes, that is a handful of people who are clearly, and again, my term, not his, perverting the intent of campaign finance reform to create, well, their own private Idaho right here in Rhode Island. He's responsible for it. His name is Bill Hunt. No stranger. He is the Libertarian Party candidate for District 68. Given the sudden demise, if you will, of the last month's election winner, and he'll be joining us in just a second. Folks, stay tuned. We'll be right back. And we're back. We are the Coalition, as always, loud and proud, outrage porn free. And I've never been prouder of this moment to introduce or reintroduce a frequent offender here at the Coalition. Of course, that's candidate Bill Hunt, running for Rhode Island General Assembly in the recently vacated, although can you call it vacated if it was never inhabited, seat for District 68 of your General Assembly, of course, that being the Bristol Warren seat. He who shall no longer be named resigned this week under pressure as a result of an ongoing series of revelations regarding, well, let's be blunt, how campaigns are financed in the East Bay and, well, potentially across the rest of the state of Rhode Island, and even, I would say, the model being employed around the nation. Bill, congratulations. It was just a stellar effort this week.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Like I said, nobody wants to have the notoriety from someone else's downfall. But I think that this is a good opportunity for the representative or the people in the District 68 to have a mulligan, as it were, to have a second bite of the apple in order to choose the right person to represent them in the General Assembly.
Right. We're going to have you on a couple times during the campaign so that we can. And by the way, well, the offer is open to anyone running for the seat. If you'd like to come in here and sit down and have an issues-based conversation, because we are outrage porn and we are issues dependent here, you're welcome to contact us at coalitionradioshow@gmail.com. And that's regardless of you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, or in this case, Libertarian. The scope of what's happening is starting to broaden. My take it as someone who's kind of watching it somewhat a little bit from afar, is that the early revelations about Mr. Asensio's allegedly or admittedly doctored invoicing and doctored mailer have been used by folks involved with him to sort of attempt to diminish the growing scope of these revelations. There's a compelling podcast, by the way, that we'll give you a link to both here and at the end of this interview at Liberty RI, where Bill had the luxury of about an hour or so, more time than he's got tonight, with with Mike Rinaldi, who's the vice chairman of the Libertarian Party, and Eric, who's also our political affairs director, where they go into infinite detail. But it's much more than a doctored invoice, isn't it?
Well, that's really the question. Is the doctored invoice is the tip of the iceberg. This is what basically it was the straw that broke the camel's back, as it were. Back during the primary debates, or the regular general election debates, rather, I brought up some additional questions about Lofton's background as a commercial shell fishing person who didn't have a license with the DEM, wasn't reporting any income on his campaign ethics filings with the ethics department in the state of Rhode Island. So there was, more than anything else, it was more of a proverbial fish story, his backstory, and a lot of things that didn't add up.
And by the way, have we been able to ascertain if, in fact, Mr. Asensio knows how to swim?
I cannot confirm or deny that. I have not seen him in the water myself personally.
Okay, fair enough.
But and that actually speaks to the larger point, is that I am not here to sit here and cast judgment. I'm not here to accuse anyone. I'm not here to attack anyone. The simple thing I did from the point during the debates through this last week of craziness that's occurred is just point out the facts as they've been presented through the public records that we have access to as citizens of the state of Rhode Island, as constituents for these individuals, and ask the question, explain the discrepancies. And that's what I really want to get across. I am not accusing anyone of anything. I am merely asking the question, why are there discrepancies in what we are finding? So, so to talk about what the Board of Elections complaint is, what I think you were referring to, is there is a political action committee known as the Rhode Island Working Families PAC that has in-kind donations occur on a regular basis to the candidates that they endorse in various races. Now, the gist of the complaint is there's two sides of a ledger. The first side would be the in-kind donations showing up on the campaign finance reports for the Political Action Committee. The second side of the ledger would be the candidates reporting those in-kind donations on their individual campaign finance reports. During the campaign, I noticed some discrepancies, and recently, earlier this week, when all the campaign finance reports were due, I did further due diligence and found out that there were a vast number of discrepancies, either reported by the PAC and not reported by the candidate, or reported by the candidate and not reported by the PAC. Does that make sense?
In a really twisted way, it does.
Yes.
So you've got this Working Families PAC. Now, this is part of a national organization, or are they primarily local to Rhode Island? So
the Working Families Party started off in New York, and they have been expanding across the country. The newly elected congresswoman from New York, in Brooklyn or the Bronx or whatever, right. or I can never pronounce her name correctly. Right. We know who we're talking about. The socialist that couldn't afford an apartment in Washington, D.C., right. Is a very big member of the Working Families Party. Their main issues are $15 an hour minimum wage, paid sick leave, and a few other issues that are really just, sound good in theory. They like to make these assertions that they're going to help the average everyday worker, but anyone with an Economics 101 course would be able to tell you that these ideas don't work in practice, and what they do is they basically cut the bottom rungs off the ladder for the people that need these jobs the most.
How pervasive have they been in the last two election cycles here in Rhode Island?
They've been extremely pervasive. They have a very well-organized political action committee. Mm-hmm. They have staff that's hired specifically to work for that political action committee. My former opponent and individual who we're discussing tonight was a paid lobbyist for this political action committee prior to him running. They had shared office space on 16 Cutler Street in Warren, so they had the financing to pay for these office space.
That's got to be expensive.
I would imagine, as the Fung campaign can tell you, that maintaining an office space is an expensive proposition for any political candidate, and it's important that you have all that taken care of and is above board. So the fact that a organization like a political action committee or a candidate themselves for a state legislator seat has their own campaign office talks to the fact that they are a very well organized and very well funded organization.
And with a fair amount of success in the last 2 election cycles.
They have had a lot of success getting their progressive candidates elected, especially in the East Bay. They've also had a lot of success in Providence with some of their candidates who knocked off some pretty well-established Democratic, longtime insider incumbents. And they've knocked them off in the primaries primarily when there is a low voter turnout.
And that seems to be their MO. They're essentially, in the early stages, cherry picking low voter turnout, small districts, particularly when there's little or no opposition existing, or there's a weak, I'll call them legacy Democratic candidate.
Yep. The legacy Democrats don't tend to campaign as hard. They're running based upon their name recognition, and they, you know, in a general election, it's easy for them to beat any independent or Republican or Libertarian challenger because they are the easy choice for the vast number of people that are coming out in the general election to vote for a governor or a president or a congressman, senator, whatever case you may have. In a Democratic primary, the voter turnout is much lower, and it's a very motivated voter that's coming out in the primary. So it's very easy for an organization such as the Rhode Island Working Families Party to target certain organizations or certain candidates rather in a primary and spend their money judiciously. For comparison, my opponent Lofton spent I think it was around $25,000 of the $30,000 he spent in the entire election season on the primary, and only spent about $5,000 on the general election, which tells you where they place their emphasis and what their goals are when they you know, go after someone in a primary.
Right, and it's essentially zombie candidates. You know, the tragedy here, of course, is that they're using a flawed set of existing campaign finance laws and a flawed system of elections to essentially hijack the government.
Well, and I have referred to them as a cancer or a virus on the Democratic Party because, you know, I think back to Tom Hanks in the Pirate movie where they have boarded the bridge and they are looking at the leaders of the Democratic Party and saying, I am the captain now. And they are taking over these individual seats at the primary level. And many of these people, after they win the elections on the primary, go unopposed in the general election and have a free ride right to the State House.
Right. Where they then conflate that with having some type of mandate to essentially engage in a campaign of even a higher level of income redistribution, a higher level, of course, of taxation, and quite frankly, as we found out in the last week or two with test scores, a higher level of failure that seems to come along, if you will, in some sort of linear fashion with their hijacking.
In a single party state like Rhode Island, they've effectively found a way to cut out the conservative vote, particularly the Republican vote, entirely from their campaign strategy. Because when you run in a Democratic primary, only Democrats and unaffiliated voters are allowed to vote in the primary. So if you are a registered Republican in one of these districts where there is no person besides in a general election running, only the two candidates in the primary, you don't even get the opportunity to vote for the person that's going to represent you in the State House.
Right. And as a result, you've got situations where individuals who are getting in the neighborhood of 1,000 to 2,000 votes are ultimately, controlling the purse strings, the wallet of government here in Rhode Island.
It's intellectually dishonest. It's I don't think that you know, running as a libertarian, I hear all the time that I should just run as a Republican or you're never going to win unless you run as a Democrat. I personally think that I run as a libertarian because I am a libertarian. If the progressives had any intellectual honesty, they would run as a third-party progressive candidate and put their ideals on the line and ask the voters to vote for their ideals instead of trying to take over the Democratic Party itself.
And the current mantra, and it's been in place for a few years, it's gotten more ironic, is that anyone who opposes them is not a Democrat, it's a Republican who ran as a Democrat.
I get that all the time. The implications on Facebook posts saying that I will never vote for a Republican, and and I'm sitting there saying I'm not a Republican, or libertarians are just light versions of Republicans, and it just is an attack that it's difficult to defend because you can point them all you want to the libertarian platform, but they just have the blinders on, and they are straight party voting people that vote just for Democrats, just for the progressive candidates. So it's really a losing battle in that regard. So really, it's the people who are out there, who are the unaffiliated voters, who most likely would associate with the Libertarian Party if they understood the platform completely, that I feel is my responsibility to go out and try to educate them about the platform and why I'm the best candidate for the job.
And that's, by the way, one of the remarkable parts of the candidates we have run in this state is their willingness to embrace conversation and or debate at any level. I'm not picking on Republicans tonight. Some of our best friends are Republicans. But, when I looked to the last election, there was a handful of cases where Republican candidates, given the opportunity to debate progressive Democrats, didn't. I get the sense, having gotten to know you over the last 4 or 5 years, you're pretty much willing to debate anyone, anytime, any place, anywhere, in a highly positive, engaging, conversational manner.
I would love to have a free-form debate, not these forums that we've had in the last few elections where a question is asked and you have either 60 seconds or 30 seconds in order to answer a complex a question about a serious political issue. I would much rather have a free-flowing discussion with their best progressive candidate they have, and put the ideas against one another and come up with come down to the bare bones of it and lay ourselves on the line and have an honest discussion about the principles behind the ideas that they're pushing.
Is that a challenge?
I'd love to challenge anybody who would like to debate me on those issues.
Right. So, even though this is a short election, what's been missing, and I agree with you, and by the way, the League of Women Voters, I think, put on very, very nice
they do a
forums.
Fantastic job.
They do a great job. What's missing is that, you're right. And the forums have served as should be serving as a nice setup tool for what ultimately needs to be, particularly in light of the recent events, where clearly people are using party labels as a way to vote for people without any of their own due diligence. To me, let's let the sunlight in.
Hey, let's do it. I would love to have a debate with any of the many candidates that have declared.
We're up to about 200 or 300 right now, right?
I think so. I know we've been on the air for a few minutes, so there might have been about
there might be more.
four or five people that jumped in. So it's
and you've got a statement to that effect too. And there's two statements today, and I'll tease them, and I'd like you to develop them that I think are very, very powerful. The first off, of course, is all these folks who are new to where you been, and number two, you point out very aptly something that's been a libertarian mantra in this state now for about a year or so, the notion of the public paying for Democratic Party, and essentially Republican Party, if there was a primary, private organizations, private candidate selection, particularly since there's no accountability, as it was pointed out by the heads of the Democratic Party when they ran roughshod off of Bernie. All right, these are private organizations. Speak to those two challenges right now.
Certainly. So in 2014, the incumbent rep ran unopposed. In 2016, I said to myself, we can't let this guy run unopposed. You at least have to have someone to challenge them. You can't just give him a free pass into the General Assembly. So with no political experience and deciding to run as a libertarian, I threw my hat in the ring. I had no money. I didn't have a ton of contacts. I didn't know what the heck to expect. But I threw my hat in the ring and I challenged him. In 2018, there was only one of the candidates that is considering running in this special election who actually put his hat in the ring to challenge Lofton in a primary. So now all these people are coming out of the woodwork and saying to themselves, I'm going to go run for this election. I'm going to go try to steal something in a special election. My question is to them is, where have you been for the past 6 years when these two individuals have been running for state office? Is it that they didn't want the challenge, or they didn't want to expend the effort to run a campaign from June and earlier all the way through November, and they think they can just run in 90 days and not have to put a lot of work in? And what does that say about how they're going to be at the State House and what type of effort they want to put in to represent the people of District 68? The second is,
I was also going to add, one of them is actually sitting as a town councilman. I mean, it's very easy to run when you're an establishment elected official and not have to run at the risk of your current office.
Yep.
At the same time, if we're going to engage in the vigorous campaign that the East Bay doesn't just need, it demands, how does that reconcile itself with being a city councilman in a town that is a wonderful town but faces the challenges and the economic issues that all towns everywhere face?
Well, you just touched on economic issues. Small towns in Rhode Island are constantly being squeezed by the state government in terms of the amount of money they're being reimbursed from the income taxes that they collect on us. Not a lot of the towns, smaller towns like Bristol and Warren, get as large of their budgets funded to them as a city like Providence or Woonsocket or Central Falls does. And if you go to any of these budget hearings for these small towns, you'll notice that a lot of these amounts that we're talking about to fund these specific programs are very small amounts. They're thousands of dollars, not millions of dollars. So for a sitting town councilman, both in Bristol and Warren, to declare their candidacy for this seat, full well knowing that if they were to win this special election, their seat would be vacated, and that would create another opportunity for another special election, which would then cost the taxpayers even more money. And heaven forbid if two Democratic candidates decided to run in a primary for that town council seat, now you'd have a special election primary and a special election for the now vacated town council seat. And Pat, what would happen if a school committee member decided that they wanted to run for town council, and we then had to replace that school committee member? I don't understand why these individuals who went ahead and ran for the position of town council person, they had every opportunity to run for District 68 if they wanted to. Back in June, they could have declared, they could have put their hat in the ring and done so. Why they think it's okay to waste taxpayer money and to leave their seat that they just got sworn into literally days ago and throw their hat in the ring for this special election, hoping to win on name recognition that they just got basically by winning the seat. How does that show? As a council person, you should know best about what a budget deficit is and how much these small amounts. We're talking about $16,000 to $18,000. We've been told has been estimates about how much each one of these special elections cost. And so it's something that just boggles my mind, that makes them think that they can do this type of thing.
Well, and you've got a solution. It's a very simple one, right?
It's a very simple solution. So we touched on it earlier. If there's a Democratic primary, only the Democrats and unaffiliated voters are allowed to vote in it. So that leaves the Republicans, if there are registered Republicans, disenfranchised if they are unable to vote in that primary election. Why should those Republican voters then be forced to subsidize that primary in the forms of paying for it with their tax dollars?
Right.
Just the reason why the entire people of District 68 are being forced to subsidize a private organization like the Democratic Party. We're being forced to pay for their primary, to nominate someone to fill the seat of the person that they nominated before, who was resigned in disgrace after learning that he lied and misrepresented himself. It just doesn't make any sense. The private corporations need to fund their own nomination process. I would love the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. They can go ahead and contract with the state and make payments directly to the state for the cost of their primary. They can use all the voting machines. They can use the campaign donors, everything. It would be a great revenue source and help relieve some of the tax burden of the taxpayers. Having the ability to conduct an election should be considered an asset by the state that these private corporations should be willing to pay a premium in order to take advantage of, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you, absolutely. We've talked about this often on the air, and you and I together. There was a moment in the last General Assembly session where there was an attempt by the General Assembly to remove the one requirement that political parties have in this state, which is biannually to produce a party platform. And that was, there was testimony, and I happened to be there that night. And we'll point out as libertarians again and again and again that in one sense, we certainly don't believe in the philosophy of government paying for private parties. But these are people who don't even feel it's necessary to put forward a statement of their beliefs as required by the state law that they probably passed. So they are treated to endless subsidies at the expense of the taxpayer. It's a private organization, as they pointed out time and time again, that gets to set their own rules. They have the votes. One of the great lines I think of this election, I'll see if I can get it right, was when does the voting end for an election? A little boy asked his father. Well, for the Republicans, it ends November 3rd, in this case, the last election. For the Democrats, it ends whenever they get enough votes to win. But the bigger picture is we continue to subsidize these private organizations, and by doing so, we reinforce the notion that somehow that these private organizations have some type of extra legal authority, that they in fact constitute a legitimate part of government, when in fact they are nothing but private affiliates who seek to perform a private service for their own personal benefit.
Yep. And they also, what I've seen a lot in the responses from the scandal that broke is they pass the buck to the voters. They don't even take, if they nominated their own candidate internally, they would be forced to take responsibility for whatever candidate they put up in the election. What they've been saying is that you can't blame the Democratic Party as a whole. You have to blame the voters for voting this individual into the nominee. And it's circular logic that passes the buck, and it prevents them from taking responsibility for the candidates that they put up, because it's a false sense of choice. There is no real choice. There's a lot of people behind the scene that are picking these people. There's jockeying. There's political horse trading that goes on in the background that limits the choice that people have in the state. And it's time people wake up and realize that this is all political theater, and that there's no one to blame for this situation. It's the candidates not to blame. It's the corrupt organization that is running the Democratic Party in the state that is to blame for this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know you have to get to an event tonight. If you can give everyone, and we'll have ample opportunity to see again in the future, give everyone the elevator pitch, if you will. Let's move past for a moment the events of this past week, and let's reiterate the themes of your campaign. What does Billy Hunt, Libertarian, stand for in terms of what people can expect from him as a member of the Rhode Island General Assembly?
Well, a lot got lost in my campaign because I was running against a candidate that was running strictly on his backstory, a lot of sizzle with no substance. And so I think a lot of the things that got brought up, specifically in my political statements to the paper, were some good ideas that I was trying to put out there in ways that I would affect change at the State House. My plan is to be the watchdog in the State House. Just like my intuition has told me that my opponent's backstory wasn't all it was, and some of the information that I've uncovered based upon the Rhode Island Working Families Party, based upon my intuition. Imagine what I could do if I had the insider knowledge of a elected official in the State House seeing how the sausage is made, instead of just some individual from the outside only having access to the public access records requests that they provide me. Beyond that, I promise to be a champion for small businesses, to reduce the amount of small business regulations. GoLocal was kind enough to publish an article that I wrote about some of the small business regulations that are hurting this state, and something as innocuous as filing an annual report for a corporation or LLC can throw businesses into a complete tailspin and cost them tons of money and put them at a lot of risk liability-wise. And I also want to be the watchdog for the taxpayer in the state. Just like we've been talking about these issues with publicly funded primaries, there's thousands of ways that we can cut taxpayers' expenses in state government. There's things that we can find, and there's just someone needs to be up there pushing these ideas and making them known to the members up there and to the taxpayers and the constituents as a whole, so that they get acted upon. Because if we keep on electing the same people over and over again, it's only going to continue to be the status quo, and nothing's going to change at the State House.
Great stuff. How can people find your campaign?
Hope with Hunt is my my campaign tagline. That's my website, hopewithhunt.com. Twitter handle, Hope with Hunt. Facebook.com/Hope with Hunt. Instagram, Hope with Hunt. You know, it's something that I thought was going to be put on the shelf for another 2 years, but here it is, Christmas time. It might be a Christmas miracle that once again there's Hope with Hunt.
Excellent, excellent. So, takeaway from today, a couple of things. Number one, there are more revelations potentially to be had. This is going to be an ongoing issue for the rest of the campaign, I believe. Number two, you're willing to debate, you're issuing a challenge to whether they be at the primary level. Hey, tomorrow, if they got a free hour, let's come on by. It's the miracle of Facebook Live. You know, we can have the entire state watching. You're willing to debate anyone, anywhere, anytime on anything.
Of course.
Excellent. And again, you're a committed candidate, and you've been committed to the future of your district, District 68, Bristol Warren, from the get-go. You've been working at this for 4 or 5 years. You're intimate with the issues. You're a member of that community, an active member of that community on a personal level as well as a business level. And you're looking to really, in one sense, you're clearly evoke libertarian philosophy, but you're going to be truly a representative for everyone, regardless of their philosophy.
Of course, you have to. My biggest goal as a libertarian is to protect the biggest minority that's out there, the smallest minority, however you want to look at it, which is the individual. In business, as in finance, as in home finance, if you look after the pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves. We need to make sure that we have as much liberty and freedom for the individual, and that will just filter its way through the rest of the system, and we don't have to worry about all of the other government engineering to provide that to people. This should just be inherent, and it's a God-given right that they should have.
Excellent.
Thank
Thanks
you
for coming on, buddy. All right. And again, just for the record, I want to make clear that this seat is open to anyone, actually any candidate. We have only a few rules here at the coalition when it comes to candidates. Number one, we do not engage in rooting for or overanalyzing or bench coaching or this is an issues-only environment. I don't care about your fundraising. I don't care about your polling. I don't care if you even have polling. We don't want to know if you're going to win. We simply want to know why you should. So the seat is open to anyone running in the District 68 election. I'm going to put out invitations to all of them, as well as I'm willing to host a debate here. And I think it would be a wonderful exercise in democracy, particularly coming from the intermediate sphere. So Bill Hunt, Libertarian candidate, General Assembly, District 68, hopewithhunt.com. We'll be talking soon, I think.
Thanks, Pat. Appreciate
it.
All
Buddy.
right, buddy. All right.
We're going to take a quick break now. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, as always, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live from the Worldwide Coalition headquarters here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center in the heart of the city we so somewhat unrequitantly love, Providence, Rhode Island. We're going to take a quick break. Joining us in the next segment is an all-star lineup tonight. Not only do we have Goldwater, not only do we have Billy Hunt. In the next segment, we've got Eric Boehm from Reason Magazine talking about a few of his articles, and something that I've been waiting to talk about for a long time. At 8 o'clock, we're going to try and bring in Joe Larissa. Joe, of course, has been, if you will, the expert critic on the notion that this state can go forward with sports betting without any sort of taxpayer consent as required by the Rhode Island Constitution. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. And we are the Coalition, loud and proud on this wintry Friday night here deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. As always, outreach porn-free, civilly disobedient media. Joining us live again via the miracle of Skype telephone is someone who's been a great contributor to the show over the last year or so. And of course, I'm talking Eric Boehm. He's one of the writers at Reason Magazine, also at reason.com. Now, earlier tonight, we had the Goldwater Institute on. The pillars of this show, quite frankly, in terms of external organizations, are Reason and Goldwater. Always required reading, appointment reading for both of them. I can't, and I never seem to say enough, although I always say a lot about these organizations. The issue behind Reason Magazine, why they're so important, it's original writing. You minus the spin, minus the reporting of someone else's reporting. You've got insightful, accessible writing on issues of the day and how they're impacted from a liberty perspective. And they cover everything. Federal issues, foreign policy, sexual politics, judicial system, Supreme Court, everyday outrage issues, our president. And again, looking at it from a completely different perspective. Great thinkers always answer questions that haven't even been asked yet. And this is something that's routine at reason.com. Now, they're going through their own annual fundraiser, if you will, similar but not quite as intrusive as what you'll typically see on public radio or public TV. You know, there's all sorts of ways that you can contribute. First step, though, bookmark the page. Better yet, make them your homepage. Either Goldwater or Reason, you can't lose. Eric's been with us a bunch of times. What we like to do is we take a couple of his most recent articles, his most compelling articles, and just kind of do a quick run through and kind of add his own unique insight. You know, and I'm looking down the list, and I don't even know where to begin because there's so much great stuff. I mean, let's start off with one of my pet issues, and that's, of course, Airbnb. Now, my take on Airbnb is that in a very large sense, they've been a savior to the economy in ways that are, I think, too often untold. Airbnbs routinely have taken distressed properties in cities around the nation. During the Libertarian National Committee convention, I actually stayed in an Airbnb in what was at one point a challenged neighborhood in New Orleans. I had the advantage of having a tiny house, a one-bedroom house with modern facilities that I was able to rent for about $70 a day. Less than half of what the conventional chain hotels would charge me. And for the chain hotels, I just like to say this once, tough darts, farmer. Suck it up, buttercup. You know, this notion that you somehow have a lock on vacation stays is crazy to me, because at a certain level, Airbnbs have stimulated the construction economy. They've enabled tourism by a class of people who might not otherwise afford it. It has been, in every level, a win-win. And largely at the, if you will, at economic growth of the area community, because in the case of my stay, I stayed in a local neighborhood, ate at local restaurants, went to the local supermarket, bought gas at the local gas station, used Uber from the local Uber drivers. Quite frankly, I don't know how it gets any better than this. But what went down at Miami Beach? What's going on here, Eric?
Well, thanks so much for having me on, Pat. Always good to be here. Miami Beach is an interesting situation. It's probably maybe the most egregious or the most aggressive policing of Airbnbs anywhere in the country. The city has recently, just earlier this year, actually, they upped the fines for illegal Airbnbs from $1,500 for a first offense all the way up to $100,000 for a first offense. I mean, look, Miami Beach is a high rent district, no doubt about it. There's a lot of people there with a lot of money. But even still, $100,000 for a first offense, just for putting your home up, renting out a spare bedroom or something for a weekend, seems a little stiff to me.
Onerous, as they would say. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. So, the latest development in the story I wrote this week has to do with a lawsuit that's actually been filed. There are actually a couple of different lawsuits that are currently going on regarding these fines. But the latest one, the most interesting one, is this homeowner, Ralph Serrano. He has accused the city of resorting to strong-arm tactics to get him to pay what he says are constitutionally excessive fines. We'll come back to the constitutionally excessive part in just a second, but basically what happened is that he's facing fines of over $200,000, and he refused to pay them, and so the city took the unusual step of cutting off the water and power and sewer services to his house, which is, yeah, I mean, a way to maybe get somebody to pay a fine, but that's not something that the city is authorized to do under the zoning code that says Airbnbs are illegal. There's a series of punishments laid out in that zoning code, but nowhere in there does it say anything about being allowed to turn off water or power supply to the house, which they did. So he, sued the city over this, and they went in front of a judge just this past week, and the judge ruled. The judge ordered the city to turn the water and power back on. Ralph Serrano says that's fine and good, and he's excited about having water and power back on in his property. But the power's been off for months now, and he's got mold issues and lots of other things going on. So there's a lot of problems there.
By the way,
I think really the big part of the story is just sort of these kind of strong arm tactics. The city's imposing these ridiculous fines, and then and then resorting to turning off your lights to get you to pay them.
I just, forgive me if you will, and the reference is kind of dated, and it's kind of in honor of George W. Bush. I have this mental image of this gentleman being the Airbnb equivalent of Manuel Noriega. I mean, did they play loud rap music or classical music outside of his house late at night? Could we expect an airstrike anytime soon? Is in fact they going to at one point kidnap his children and have them speak into a megaphone outside his house, telling them to please step away from the computer? This notion that we would treat entrepreneurial Americans who own private property truly as criminals of the state in order to protect the economic monopoly, if you will, that some large corporations have is disgusting. Listen, I'm not ever going to advocate violence. I'm a libertarian. We believe in something called the non-aggression principle. But I'm sitting and watching what's going on in Paris with the carbon tax riots, and that is no solution to, by the way, the carbon tax situation over there. And I'm watching the French explode over this, and I'm watching Americans, to a certain degree, have a collective yawn over the complete subjugation of their property rights. I mean, do we have property rights in this nation anymore?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I would go that far to say that we don't have property rights, but I mean, I think, and I think actually the judge's ruling this week is a really, is a positive sign. The order saying that, hey, look, Miami Beach, you can't do whatever you want to enforce these fines. There are rules that we play by, and Miami Beach has outlined it. And look, I mean, a city is allowed to impose, I guess to some extent they're allowed to impose these fines. Well, I mean, we'll hold on, we'll get to that in just a second, I guess. But there's a series of processes laid out here that the city has for saying, look, if you violate our zoning rules, let's say you're not allowed to have Airbnb rentals more or less anywhere in the city, then there's a series of things the city can do, starting with these fines, and then they can eventually, they can go to court, and they can seek court orders and injunctions and whatever to get you to pay them. They can't turn off your water, they can't turn off your sewer, and then just to sort of even go beyond that, to add insult to injury here, what the city did when Serrano went to the city and said, hey, how can we get this resolved? I want to get my water and power turned back on. They gave him this whole long list of demands that included things like showing proof that he had a long-term rental contract for the house rather than the short-term rentals that are illegal. They required him to show that, even though it's technically illegal to rent a house without the certificate of occupancy, which is something they had revoked when they turned off the water and power. So there's a whole bunch of different things. I mean, the city just is overstepping its bounds here in enforcing these rules, obviously. And then you can go to the question of these fines, just the sort of basic question of whether it's okay to fine somebody $100,000 or $200,000 just for renting out a room in their house. And the Florida Constitution is pretty clear on this. The Florida Constitution forbids the state and entities of the state, municipalities like Miami Beach, from imposing excessive fines on people. And even a member of the Miami Beach City Council has admitted on the record to a reporter that the fines that they are imposing for Airbnbs are grossly disproportional. That's a quote, grossly disproportional to the crime that's being committed here. It's not even a crime, it's just a zoning violation. And so it's absurd to think that you could, end up with a six-figure fine just for renting out your your spare room, or in this case it was a garage, finished garage that Ralph Serrano was renting out. It's absolutely crazy. It's probably unconstitutional. We haven't yet gotten a ruling on that. There's another lawsuit working its way through the Florida court system right now that is challenging the Miami Beach Airbnb zoning provision on the grounds that it is unconstitutional under the Florida Constitution to issue these fines. And I think that's from our friends at the Goldwater Institute are behind that lawsuit, or are helping out with that lawsuit as well. I think the Constitution is pretty clear on that. The Florida Constitution seems pretty clear to me. I'm not a lawyer but a judge, but we'll get a ruling on that sometime, probably in the first half of next year.
Wow. From your perspective, you've done quite a bit on this. Is Airbnb, in a sense, and I'm using, in a very real sense, although there's a couple of companies to do that now, Airbnb has become sort of the Xerox, if you will, of this type of disruptive home sharing project. Are Airbnbs, in a larger sense, under attack like this nationwide?
Yeah, there are a few others. There's entities like VRBO is another one, and there's HomeAway is another one. Right. But yeah, we just use Airbnb sort of as a catch-all term, like Kleenex or Xerox or whatever. This is an ongoing fight, and it's primarily this is an outgrowth of what is really happening here behind the scenes is the fight between the hotel industry and Airbnb. Hotels don't like Airbnb. They see it as sort of pushing in on their exclusive market, which is the hospitality market. To me, it seems somewhat ridiculous because it's not like Airbnb is ever going to replace hotels. They're not going to drive hotels. There's not enough supply of Airbnb homes to ever really seriously threaten hotels in any sort of large way. I mean, maybe very, very poor hotels, maybe hotels that are in very bad shape, that don't provide any services, that are, they're bad hotels that you wouldn't want to stay in. If you have a better alternative, maybe those hotels will lose out because of Airbnb. But I mean, Hilton or Marriott are not going under because Airbnb exists. So I think you're primarily seeing this fight unfold in places like Miami Beach, places that are tourist destinations where there is a large and powerful hotel presence that has a significant amount of political influence over the local governments. So you're seeing it in cities like New York. You're seeing it in places like, just today, actually, South Lake Tahoe, which is a tourist destination out there in California, up in the mountains, the Sierra Nevada mountains. Beautiful place, by the way. But sure. Tourist destination, lots of hotels. And South Lake Tahoe just today announced that they are going to be banning all Airbnbs, or practically all Airbnb rentals, in the town of South Lake Tahoe. So I mean, that's primarily where these fights are taking place, places where there are a lot of hotels and where the hotels exert a lot of political influence. Right.
Now it's interesting. I'll mildly challenge you on the I'll call it the exigent threat. In the moderate to long, near term, I would say you're right. What's interesting, I have a 23-year-old daughter who, like a lot of 21 and 22-year-olds, lives to travel. Her apartment, she's got a nice clean apartment, but it's relatively unimportant to her. She lives to travel. And clearly this generation, more than any other that I can remember, is ready to jump on a plane on Friday at 5 o'clock and to parts unknown. Airbnb, she stayed at Airbnbs on 3 continents now. And she's not that well traveled. That's actually, in her generation, her circle of friends, that's actually become the go-to. Whereas my generation, I'm in my 50s, looks at it and, just trembles at the notion of just the awkwardness at staying in someone's home. The other interesting point is that while all these battles are going on, Airbnb is actually, and a number of the competitors are actually starting to sell hotel rooms, particularly on mid-sized chains where they're brokering hotel rooms, as well as the conventional Airbnb. So it's interesting because the disruptive economy continues to run amok, and if somehow can be kept out of the clutches of evil government, the primary beneficiary will be, as always, and as it should be, the consumer. And the nature of competition, the notion that hotels will have to step up their efforts to combat in the marketplace of ideas and commerce, Airbnbs, as opposed to just, resorting to, using political clout through a variety of sources to fight them. I don't know how long you can continue to win that battle before you're seeing permanent changes in behavior. And ultimately, the consumer will benefit. Local economies, I actually believe, benefit from the presence of Airbnbs because the money is kept much more local, as opposed to acting as in a subtle form of capital flight out to the large, hotel chains. Which actually brings us up to, actually, I'm going to hold the tariff issue for a second, because the same theme is there. The notion that tariffs ultimately are a highly regressive tax is something that I am 100% on board with you. But there's one fun issue that we're taking with a great deal of humor here, and that's the baseball stadium in Camden. I shared your article around this week, and if you remember, because I know you talk to folks all over the country, we recently had our own stadium issues. Twice the AAA affiliate of the Boston Red Sox organization tried to build stadiums at great expense to the taxpayer. Twice they were effectively rebuffed, and now they've left for fertile field in Worcester, Massachusetts, to which I say, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Now you've got a situation which is just, again, reinforces the notion that baseball stadiums are not accretive to local income. They do not, in and of themselves, generate great economic activity. What happened in Camden? What was announced in Camden, New Jersey this week?
Yeah, this is a really good one, and really, it's maybe the best example I think I've ever found of just the sort of the waste that goes on with these, minor league baseball stadiums in particular. If you could apply it to Major League Baseball stadiums too, although this specific story wouldn't happen, I don't think, with a Major League stadium. But what happened in Camden is that you go back to the early 2000s, and the state of New Jersey put up $18 million through various economic development funds to build a minor league stadium right along the riverfront in Camden, New Jersey. I grew up right across the rivers from there. I grew up right outside of Philadelphia, and I know from driving to the Jersey Shore on weekends in the summer, you would go over the Ben Franklin Bridge, and you could literally see the stadium, right under the Ben Franklin Bridge.
Right.
In a beautiful spot, right on the waterfront with the bridge over the outfield, and just really, really gorgeous spot for a stadium. But they put up $18 million to build this thing for an Atlantic League team called the Camden River Sharks. The team was there for about 15 years or so. They pulled up stakes and moved to New Britain, Connecticut a couple of years ago. And now the city of Camden is going to tear the stadium down, and it's going to cost taxpayers another $1 million to tear the stadium down. It's only been there for less than 20 years, far less than 20 years, only about 15 years. For a team that basically didn't ever live up to the promises that were made when the stadium was built. This was supposed to be the beginning of a rejuvenation of the Camden riverfront. There was going to be a tram built across the river from Philadelphia. It was going to be, this was the big economic development promise of turning Camden around, if you will.
Right.
Back when the stadium was first, when ground was broken for the stadium back in 2000, then Governor Christine Todd Whitman of New Jersey quoted Field of Dreams and said, if you build it, they will come. It's like the worst cliche possible in politics when you're talking about stadiums. I wish I had a list of all the politicians that have used that line over the years. And, at the end of the day, they didn't come. Some people came to the game. The team was mildly successful, but the stadium never made money, never paid back its debt. Ultimately, the city of Camden had to actually bail the stadium out a couple of times. And then when they started charging the team rent in 2015, the team decided they didn't want to pay rent, and they packed up and moved away.
We don't need those stinking rent. If I can paraphrase, if you will, a late 1960s era philosopher that I look to at times like this, and of course I'm talking about Gomer Pyle, USMC. Surprise, a surprise, a surprise. And are you telling me that certain elected officials at the time may have, and I'll use the word, misrepresented the potential? Were they overly optimistic? This so echoes the situation that took place here in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, or nearly took place. We dodged the proverbial bullet. It's just amazing to me because I grew up in New Jersey as well. And let me ask you a really important question, by the way. Were you a Belmar guy, an Atlantic City guy? You know, were you more of a Wildwood guy? Where did a young Eric hang out down at the shore?
Yeah, so I grew up on the Pennsylvania side of the river, but when we went to the shore, my family goes to Long Beach Island every summer. Still does go to Long Beach Island. That's a little north of Atlantic City. But I've been down to Ocean City. I've been to the Wildwoods, North Wildwood and regular Wildwood, all that, a couple of times in high school with friends and all that. So that was always a good time.
There you go. So I'm pretty familiar with Camden. I've done a lot of business in Philadelphia. So here you have a resurgent, to a certain degree, northeastern city, urban core, all the usual issues, and you've got Camden, a very, very troubled city. One of the toughest in the Northeast. I mean, you know, in all seriousness, Pawtucket is in far better shape, both spiritually and economically, than Camden. But you've got, magically, the specter of a nearby tough urban community with depressed property values that is across a river, literally one or two choices of bridges away from a city that's got a lot going on. Now, do you either A, in terms of economic development, tried, and I think Camden also tried the aquarium route too. Do you try to come up with some silver bullet, in the words of Bart Simpson, monorail, 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 or do you allow the market to take advantage of the cheaper rents, which are directly connected to an emerging city, which would then, a la say Oakland as compared to San Francisco, create its own economic boom? Brooklyn as compared to Manhattan? Do you allow that to happen by making, barriers, eliminating barriers to entry, if you will, to the city of Camden? So folks who want to take advantage of whatever business prospects there are in Philadelphia can do so in nearby Camden? Of course not. Why would you do that? You know, the stupidity of all this just never ceases to amaze me. Imagine, if you will, if you could get bottom dollar rents right outside of Manhattan or right outside of Boston. You can't, because economies took over and the marketplace took over in those areas. We find kind of a dark humor in it, and we're sorry that it's expensive. I mean, what do you call someone from Camden? A Camdonian of Camdonians everywhere. But you know what? The point, you're right, and I'm thrilled that you seized on this, because the point couldn't be so graphically made. Not only was all that money wasted, not only was all that opportunity wasted. I mean, that land would have been ideal for development by any one of a number of entrepreneurs who are looking to take advantage of the Philadelphia marketplace. That's so, I mean, literally a canoe ride away. And then to add insult to injury, the city, and I have a feeling this happens more often than we'd like to think, the city actually has to pay to memorialize its own stupidity. It just doesn't get any better. You know, it's when it comes to corporate cronyism, Eric, there's always parting gifts. Everyone goes home a loser. And here we are, another, 15 to 20 years wasted, when they're going to start over again, when all of that time you could have seen organic economic growth. Wow. But the topper to me, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, you say that this happens over and over again, and that's absolutely true. I mean, this Camden situation is, it's unique in certain ways, but it's really very similar to actually what's going on in a lot of other northeastern cities, small northeastern cities. I lived in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for a little while. They have a minor league baseball team there. When the team threatened to move in the early 2000s, the city actually bought the team for a couple of years, kept them in place, and then paid a bunch of money to build them a new stadium. All of this contributed to Harrisburg ending up in bankruptcy a few years ago, because they lost so much money on their minor league stadium deal. There were a lot of other factors too. That's not the only thing. But Harrisburg ended up going through bankruptcy, and you can't help but wonder if maybe there were better uses for the money than building a new minor league baseball stadium for the team that was there. And then there's the other cities in New Jersey, right around the same time that this team came to Camden. This same league, the Atlantic League, which is not even part of the official minor league baseball structure, it's an independent minor league. They put teams in Atlantic City and Newark as well. So think about Camden, think about Atlantic City, think about Newark. What do you think about? They're all kind of depressed cities. They're all not places you would probably want to live. but they all built new stadiums for these minor league teams all around the same time, late 90s, early 2000s. All three of those teams don't exist anymore, or at least they don't exist in those cities anymore. They've all moved on to greener pastures.
Right.
So Newark has already torn down the stadium that they built. Camden is now in the process of tearing down the stadium that they built. And Atlantic City has turned the stadium into a high school baseball stadium now, so they're at least still getting some use out of it. But it's this sort of phenomenon of all three of these cities simultaneously, and the state of New Jersey pitched in a bunch of money in all three cases.
Right.
Built these three stadiums, and now 20 years later, they're all either demolished or sitting empty.
I think as a necessary penalty, all of the people who showed up at either the ribbon cutting or the Eponymous golden. Usually, there's a golden trowel somewhere where they dug the first bit of land out, or there's a golden brick. All the people who showed up that meeting should be there to push the button on the demolition. That should just be required under the law, so that because you can't help but watch the clown parade take place when there's all the guys are lined up and uncomfortable in their Brooks Brothers suits and a hard hat, looking much like John Kerry did when he visited that that lab so famously during his election. We'll just leave it at that. But I mean, it's these are the symptoms, by the way. These are not the disease. These are symptoms of a fundamental economic ignorance that takes place. And by the way, to your point, well made, they're always the troubled cities that are gone after intentionally. The developers of these properties, and I don't know if have you ever seen the monorail episode from The Simpsons?
Yeah.
I mean, this is not a Springfield idea; it's a Shelbyville idea. Yeah, I mean, they go after cities who are desperate. We're having the same thing here. There's someone here who wants to build a 600-foot tower in the heart of downtown Providence, using, shockingly, tax stabilization agreements and all sorts of, cutely named grants by our socialist in chief here, Gina Raimondo, and the same arguments that happen when something called 38 Studios happened. If we don't do this, no one will come and invest here. Instead of sticking to fundamental free market economics, eliminating barriers to entry, as I always like to say, we have seen the enemy and he is us.
Yeah, and if you're a city like Camden, or a city like Newark, or a city like, you could include Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, or Bridgeport, Connecticut's another example. It's another place where they built the same exact league, the Atlantic League. They put a minor league team there at Bridgeport, Connecticut. They built a brand new stadium for them in the late 90s. The team folded up a decade later, and the stadium has now been torn down. It's the exact same story over and over again in all these different places. And you just wonder, in all of these places, it's not about it's not just about the money that we spent to build the stadium or then to tear the stadium down, but it's about just the sort of lack of vision on the part of the political leaders to say that, this is the one thing our city is lacking is a minor league baseball stadium, when in reality there's obviously lots of other things your city is lacking, because your city is a struggling place. And so rather than putting in the effort to actually improve the environment and actually try to attract residents and businesses that are going to be there long term, that are going to actually add to the fiber of the city, you end up throwing a bunch of money after a white whale like a minor league baseball team that is just going to pack up and move in 10 years anyway when somebody throws more money at them from across the street. It's
interesting because very often there's a minor league baseball team in Dayton, Ohio. They and I'm trying to think of the other team. Of course the team down in Charlotte. Or the Durham area, I should say. Those are teams that are often pointed out as, look how good the economy is now. Somehow they conflate the coincidental appearance of a minor league baseball team with a boom economy. And I think what should be a requirement in every municipality, the city of Dayton actually does an annual economic development report. It's actually quite good reading if you're a wonk like, you and I. But they actually talk about the real factors of economic development. So we had a situation here where the Dayton team was pointed out. So I just, in my Googling, I happened to stumble across this report. And I read 2 or 3 years, kind of ran through them. And Dayton's economic growth might have something to do more with the presence of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is the largest single research and development facility for the United States Air Force on the planet.
Yeah.
It might have a little of that. It might have a little to do with aggressive private investment by folks who are spinning off of the University of Dayton. It might have something to do with that. It might have something to do with the resurgence, if you will, in somewhat in manufacturing in what was used to be called the Rust Belt. Might have something to do with that. Curiously absent from any mention, any level, was the Dayton minor league baseball team. It didn't even make the radar. So these con artists who go from city to city preaching this as some form of economic salvation, I don't know. I mean, I think we would have called them medicine men in the 19th century. That seems to be the most polite way to put it now. So
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think I talked about the fact that this is just purely personal experience at this point. But I mean, I talked about the fact that I lived in Harrisburg, which was a depressed city that was going through bankruptcy at the time that I lived there. But they had a minor league baseball team, and they did okay. It was it was fine. They drew decent crowds, and that they were fairly successful, and it was a fun time. It's all fine and good, but that doesn't distract from the other financial problems that the city is having that are driving businesses away, that are driving people away. I also lived in St. Paul, Minnesota for a while, and St. Paul, Minnesota is not Chicago or New York, but it's a city that's doing pretty well for itself, has a pretty functioning downtown economy. It's certainly not Camden, New Jersey, or even Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's a pretty solid place to live. And there's a minor league baseball team there too, and they did great. They drew great crowds, and it's a very entertaining time to go to the game and whatever. And my point is that a minor league baseball team, or a major league baseball team for that matter, can add to the milieu of a modern metropolis, right? It's part of the culture, it's part of the economy, whatever. It's going to be, it can be there. It's not necessarily a thing that detracts from whatever else you've got going on as a city, but it is not single-handedly the thing that's going to save your city from economic depression or from bankruptcy. It's not going to be the thing that is the centerpiece of some sort of downtown revitalization, which is what it is so often sold as when you hear politicians or when you hear these economic consultants talk about how this is going to bring in so much development and growth. That's not true. It's a nice thing to have on the side, maybe. If you've got all your other ducks in a row, sure, having a minor league baseball team in town gives people something to do. But it's not the sort of thing that you should be breaking the bank for. It's not going to replace having low taxes and low regulations that draw in businesses and draw in people, and low rents that make people want to live there, and jobs.
Right.
It's not in any way going to replace any of those sort of functional, fundamental foundation things that a city has to have to be successful.
Right. We've effectively inverted the relationship here. The presence of a successful minor league baseball team is a reflection, I believe, of an already existing successful, multifaceted economy. It is not the reverse. All right. And so
it's a cherry on top. It's like having having an orchestra or something, right?
Right.
It's a nice, cool, artistic, cultural thing to have in your city. It's not the thing that you should sacrifice other stuff to have.
Absolutely. Now, the story that I've been dying to talk to you about, of course, is Trump's tariffs are a $42 billion regressive tax increase. You talk about a study performed by the Tax Foundation. Now, full disclosure, Joe Bishop Henchman is the vice chair of the Tax Foundation. He's also a member of the Libertarian National Committee. I'm an acquaintance of his, and I like to think of him as a friend. He's been on the show a couple of times. Wonderful guy, brilliant organization. I almost wanted to say what took so long for something like this to come out, but we're constantly in the media and by Trump Nation championing Donald Trump for effectively creating a tax for Americans everywhere and driving up the cost of goods and services. So tell me a little bit about this and what your perspective is, and how does this mesh with the spin so often heard from, the La Grande Orange?
Yeah, that's right. This is a new study that's out this week from the Tax Foundation. Erica York is actually the analyst over there who did this. study. But the bottom line in all of this is that ultimately the tariffs that the Trump administration has put on everything from steel to aluminum to solar panels, washing machines, a whole bunch of other Chinese goods, all of that ultimately adds up to about a $42 billion tax increase on Americans. And that last part is really the important part, on Americans, right? That's the key part here, because we keep hearing from the Trump administration and from his advisors like Peter Navarro that it's China that's paying for these tariffs, and that Trump, basically on a weekly basis will tweet something to the effect of other countries are paying to come here and take jobs out of America, to take our wealth away, and so we're going to put tariffs on them. And that's not the way tariffs work at all. He doesn't seem to understand this. Tariffs are ultimately a tax that are paid by consumers. They're paid by importers and users and consumers. All of it eventually filters down to you and me in some form or another. And at the end of the day, the Tax Foundation, through their complex economic modeling that they use, they've concluded that so far all of us have collectively paid $42 billion in higher costs because of these import taxes, and that money goes into the U.S. Treasury, just the way it would if we had increased income taxes across the board by $42 billion. It's the exact same consequence, a slightly different mechanism, but at the end of the day, it's money that's coming out of the U.S. economy. It's money that Americans are paying to the government, and it doesn't, to the extent that it has any effect on China, it's ultimately not China paying it. There may be some sort of knock-on effects in the form of reduced demand that may, in sort of down the chain affects Chinese businesses. But it's certainly not China. It's certainly not other countries that are paying for these things. It's us.
Right. And an example that's near and dear to my heart is, of course, what happened to the Ford Motor Company. Now, about a month or so ago, Ford announced a $1 billion charge, a billion dollar charge, and inferred, and I've seen it because I work for a chain of Ford dealerships, and I order some of this stuff. We know that major price hikes are coming down the line. Now, in what possible way can it be construed that's helpful to the American consumer?
There's not really a good argument there for that. I don't think there's really an effective argument there, and I think that's why the Trump administration has struggled to make its case for tariffs. I think that's why ultimately most of the case that has been made is one that's based on either on outright lies or on sort of misleading the way that trade works and the way that tariffs work, because there really isn't a serious case that you can make for why these things are making Americans better off. Cars are actually a great example of this. So there's a lot of steel, there's a lot of aluminum that goes into making the car. These days there's also a lot of computer parts, a lot of other components that go into making a car that aren't just the mechanical functions of a car. And a lot of that stuff comes into the U.S. from China. And that's true not just for foreign-made cars, but for American-made cars too. It's a great example of the way in which sort of the world is interconnected and in which trade benefits, not just Americans, but people from other countries and businesses in other countries as well. When you've got BMW building their cars in South Carolina, for example, that's good for American workers, but at the same time, a lot of those parts are coming from China or from places in Asia. So the world is far more complex, and I think supply chains are far more complicated and interconnected than the president really seems to understand or want to acknowledge. And that creates a situation where he either willfully or just out of ignorance continues to make this argument for tariffs that is just fundamentally wrong. That it's ultimately Americans that are paying for this. It's American companies, whether you're making cars or whether you're making beer kegs or whether you're making nails. It's ultimately those businesses that are paying for these policies.
Yeah, and I think part of it is this rather twisted desire to create the notion that we can bring back certain manufacturing jobs to America. And as you point out, the supply chain is far too complex. A number of those ships have sailed, and the only way that they're going to come back to America is if prices rise so hideously that a significant part of the market will be driven away just on the basis of cost. Ironically, a significant part of that market being Americans themselves. I mean, maybe what you guys can do, if I can make a suggestion, maybe, and I know you guys do some pretty humorous videos. Can you guys? I'm gonna make a. Can you guys like take requests? Can you do a tariffs for dummies video? Because again, I will have very intelligent people, super people, hardworking, liberty, Republican liberty types look at me and go, "Well, we're fighting the trade war for America." I mean, when the price of steel went up, American versions of U.S. Steel didn't say, we're going to hold our prices, so that we can get more of the market. What did they do? They raised their prices to match the foreign prices. That's how it works. People chase margin. It's the same reason why we have a college tuition bubble right now. If you make it easier for them to raise their prices or can justify it, guess what? They will. Every single time. People chase margin, not well-run businesses, I should say, chase volume, not just, chase margin, not just volume. And margin is what makes a company profitable. So for the love of God, I mean, we're kind of ending this the same way we did last time, when a few months ago when you were last here, when we were so depressed about, ballooning deficits. What do we do here? What's the answer? How do we educate these folks?
I don't know. I'm a little more optimistic, I think, on the tariff front than I am on the other things. I think last time we had talked about things like the national debt and pension debts and things like that, which I don't have a good answer for. I don't think there really is a good political answer for a lot of those issues, or at least not a politically palatable answer. But I think on the tariffs, this is ultimately something that will solve itself. The only question is how long it will take for the Trump administration to just recognize economic reality. But tariffs are not good for the economy. Tariffs are, and I don't just mean the American economy, I mean for the global economy. This sort of ongoing uncertainty about trade between the U.S. and some of its major trading partners, whether it's China or whether it's Canada and Mexico. Just today, for example, it was reported that the Trump administration is considering pulling out of NAFTA as soon as next week. Now, you may think, oh, that's no big deal because they reached another deal, a replacement for NAFTA, right? This new U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. That hasn't been ratified by Congress yet. That doesn't really, in any way, shape, or for all intents and purposes, that doesn't really exist yet
right.
as an actual deal. So pulling out of NAFTA is something that will send major shockwaves through the market, I would expect, next week, if that's something that Trump seriously does. The ongoing trade uncertainty with China is a major problem, not just for the American economy, but for the global economy. And these tariffs, both ways, continue to increase prices for businesses and consumers without really any sort of economic benefit that comes with them. All of these things will sooner or later, I think, resolve themselves, because eventually the Trump administration will recognize that what it's doing is actually just wrecking its own economy rather than creating any sort of better or more fair playing field with China. The only question is how long it will take to get to that recognition and how bad things get before we get there.
Right. Wow. So again, this is the beauty of Reason Magazine. In the last 45 minutes, we have discussed tariffs, Airbnbs, crony corporatism, economic development, you name it. We've pretty much covered the whole range. And you could do so too by going to Reason.com and investing in a couple hours and reading, again, highly accessible, on-target original reporting like this. And that's the genius of what you guys do. We've covered, I believe, pretty much the entire span of real issues that are facing America in less than an hour. It's astonishing. And you can while away the hours reading the normal turgid crap on the net, reporting of somebody else's reporting, and not get any of these information. And in doing, in their writing, they've drawn from some of the people that we have. They just do it really well. So, Eric, you guys continue to astonish me with the university. I'm reading down a list of other things folks can do. And the beauty of the way the website is set up, along the right-hand side, you'll see a list of articles. And if a particular writer like Eric, I follow his stuff very closely, writes an article, you simply click on his name and you'll see the last 20 or so pieces that he's written. And I'm talking about, literally half a dozen or so pieces just this week, ranging on all of these issues. G20, Paul Ryan, Tariff Man. I mean, just great stuff. Eric, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's a real treat when you come on, and I hope we have you on again soon. The offer, as always, still stands. Should you find yourself in New England, the big beer count in the sky, as we like to say here at the Coalition, is pretty high in your case. So please come, please come to visit New England, and please let us know so that you can be our guest, and we can show you and your significant others some of the great things that Rhode Island has to offer, despite being a literal cesspool of socialism here.
Thanks so much, Pat. I'll let you know.
And by the way, I always got to ask you one thing. Is there anything you want to tease us with that's coming out this week?
Well, I'll teach you this since you were talking about the website. This is somewhat under wraps, but there'll actually be a new revamped Reason.com coming in the near future. Not quite sure what the timeline is yet, but more like weeks away rather than years away. So that's an exciting thing to look forward to.
Excellent. Eric Bam, he's with Reason.com. His writing is all over the website. Great stuff. Listen, if for some chance I don't speak to you, have a wonderful holiday. Merry Christmas. Have a wonderful holiday season to you and your family. And again, thank everyone at Reason for their willingness to spend a part of their Friday nights with us up here in Little Rhodey. We're kind of hidden away. We're in the bunker here. So when folks like you provide us with some type of intellectual nutrition, it's very welcomed.
Thanks so much. Merry Christmas to you too, Pat, and Happy New Year.
All right, buddy. Folks, we're going to take one more quick break. Joining us in just a couple of minutes, Joe Larissa. He is an attorney who's been intimately involved with the expansion of casino gaming, I should say as a watchdog for a number of years now. We're going to get him on the line, and we're going to say, hey, how did they get sports gaming? I thought there was a constitution. Folks, going to go right to the break right now. Stay tuned. I'm going to get Joe on the line. We'll be right back at you. And we are back. We are the Coalition. As always, we are loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. It's a nippy night out tonight, and I can tell party revelers are out and about. This is the time of year that begins the first wave of corporate Christmas parties. I encourage you to come downtown, have your party here, and also go to that after party, because that's when everybody really gets in trouble, right? At the after party. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course, our always anti-billionaire baseball boys club, all Paul Sox political feed at Pawtucket is home. So, as I mentioned in the promotion for tonight's show, joining me is someone I haven't had a chance to meet yet in person, but I've spoken with now. And I've certainly been following what he's been doing over the last couple of years. Joseph Larissa is a lawyer here in Rhode Island. He's got an active general law practice. I'm going to ask him to talk about that a little bit, give you a little insight into his background. But he's been particularly active in a very important area of constitutional law. Now, regular listeners to the Coalition know that we are largely anti-government gambling for a number of reasons. I think it's terrible economic development. I also don't believe that the state should engage in games of chance to raise money. I also believe that, in fact, as a libertarian, if gambling is legal for the state, it should be legal for all businesses. So anyone should be able to have a casino, or in case of tonight, a sports book. But that's not the issue tonight. We're going to focus laser-like on the constitutional issue. Joe is become really the go-to authority on this around the state. But I'll give you a synopsis, and I'm going to ask Joe to go more in depth. Years ago, as we were dealing with West Warwick casinos and, well, casinos et al., and their expansion, and also the very complex issue of Indian gaming, the Rhode Island Constitution was amended so that and I'll let him give the exact words, but effectively the expansion of casino gaming had to occur only at the approval of the voters. Most recently, this happened in Newport. Now, on a physical level, 2 ballots actually take place. It has to pass in the host city, in this case Newport, or I should say in the last case Newport, and then there has to be a ballot statewide. Anecdotally, what I've found as this has progressed over the years is that typically the host city almost always is opposed to it, almost always, and typically the rest of the state is, let's go for it, if it's in somebody else's backyard. Again, that's a separate issue. What I'd like to talk about tonight is whether or not the state's newfound embrace of sportsbook gaming is in fact actually legal. Joe has written on the subject. You'll see him or hear him on WPRO. He's been all over the news, and I asked him to join us tonight to give a little bit of insight as to where we are right now and where we need to go forward to continue to assert our constitutional rights as Rhode Islanders. Joe, welcome to the show, and again, thanks for joining me on a holiday Friday evening. Tell us first a little bit about yourself. Give us a little background about your legal practice, and then how you kind of became involved in this.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
My background is on this issue. I was involved as the chief of staff at legal counsel for Governor Lincoln Almond when he was governor in the early 90s through 2002. And I became an expert in state gaming law, lottery law, and actually, indeed, with Americans and Indian tribe, I've been handling for either the state or the town of Charlestown and with their matters involving the tribe. And the present question intersects all three: constitutional law, gambling, and the Class A gaming, which is really tribal gaming. So that's my background on this question. I've basically been an attorney since 1988 and worked for Edwards and Angel downtown, which is now Lock Lewis, and then went right to the governor's office for 8 years with Lincoln Almond, and I've had my own practice in commercial law in our downtown Providence practicing an array of commercial law issues, usually on the defense side, for going on 16 years now.
Excellent. Let's talk about the atmosphere in the run-up to the constitutional amendment that we're going to discuss in the evening. What was happening at that time?
A great question, and important for the discussion we're have. What was happening is all lotteries in the state had been prohibited in Rhode Island since the Constitution in 1863 was passed. There was an exception made in the early 1970s, 1971, which said except for lotteries operated by the state. And that was the genesis of our state-operated lottery requirement, which frankly is unique in all of the United States. So we had that requirement in. The Lottery Commission started putting in all kinds of lotteries. All the money was for the benefit of the state and went to the state. And that was the status of the gambling world, legalized gambling world in Rhode Island until 1992. In 1992, out of the woodwork of secret budget talks, Governor Sullivan and the legislature introduced a budget that for the first time included something called video lotteries, and put them in two places in the state, in Newport and in Lincoln, as avenues that nobody much talked about until Harris Casino case, but those were actually operated by the state, even though the buildings were owned privately. And that created such an uproar that this new type of gaming would come into Rhode Island in the cover of darkness, that the people, 2 years later in 1994, amended the Constitution to say never again. It says no new types of gambling shall be played in the state unless and until the voters locally in the affected community and statewide approve, as you referenced. That same year, a whole host of Indian casino proposals went down in flames on the ballot, which was also the same year Lynn Common was elected. But very importantly, it was 1994, in the context of video lottery gambling expansion, when the voters said never again. And we'll get to, here we are today with sports betting, and it happened again. New type of gambling expansion without any voter approval whatsoever.
Now, let's put this in a proper perspective. How many amendments to our Constitution have happened in our recent lifetime? What?
Not many. I'm trying to think of the separation of powers, of course, which I actually was actively involved in. That happened just a few years back. This amendment and then the separation of powers and the 1994 expansion amendment, I'm really hard pressed to think of any. Few and far between, if there's even one more.
Right. So the clearly, and if you look at the politics surrounding the attempt to have a constitutional convention just a couple of years ago, this state and our Constitution is not easily toyed with. And the process is set so that amendments to our Constitution have to be pursued diligently, with a great deal of public discourse, with a great deal of legislative. I mean, this is not, yeah, let's let Judy judge. Judy, let's do a show. You don't get to wing it when you screw with the Rhode Island Constitution. so you know, it really separation of powers. I'm knocking my head too now, and really that's it. And we're talking about a time span now of almost 25 years. There's been
the only other one that just got my memory back, and again, these are all basically good government amendments that the General Assembly is forced by the people to put on the ballot. The third one is restoring Ethics Commission oversight to the legislature,
right,
which happened 2 years ago. And actually, there is one more small one that was on the ballot. It pertains to the expansion of gambling, where in 2014 there was an amendment that said even if you move the casino into an expansion within a city, and this was, Newport had this put on,
right.
You need voter approval again, so you couldn't move the highlight to another spot on the water without the voters approving it. They were very concerned about that and got the legislature to put it on and the people about it. So to your point, it's very rare to have a constitutional amendment. It's even rarer to have a constitutional convention. Those have to be put on the ballot every 10 years, and they're always voted down. And with respect to this particular issue, not only do we have it passed in 1994, but we have it strengthened just 4 years ago in 2014.
Right. So now let's flash forward. a critical point to this is what defines an expansion of gaming or new. And you brought up, you made a great point to me on our telephone conversation. This is so new, this form of gaming, sports betting, that until literally weeks ago, outside of a section of Nevada, this was illegal throughout the entire country, wasn't it?
Correct. Totally illegal. And at the time, the people voted on the 2012 and 2014 to expand video lotteries to casino gambling, which they voted for. This gaming was illegal anywhere in the country, and in particular Ireland, outside of Nevada.
Right. So here we are kind of stumbling along as we usually do in Rhode Island, from budget deficit to budget deficit. And lo and behold, in last year's budget, to a little bit of laughter and a little bit of concern, and a whole lot of people really not paying attention, outside of yourself and a few others, inserted into the budget by the governor was a significant amount of money for casino gaming. And in the millions of dollars, what concerned me at the time, I raised my suspicion, was that the amount of money that they were looking at inserting into the budget was not a gross number of betting. It represented what the state's profit would be, which meant that in this fiscal year, estimates range from $300 to $400 million, please correct me if I'm wrong, of gaming that would have to take place, that up until, or even at the time it was actually inserted into the budget, was actually illegal. It was based on the notion that the talking heads seemed to feel that the Supreme Court would rule, in the case of New Jersey, that sports betting was legal. Have you ever, I mean, you've been an intimate part of government really your entire adult life. Have you ever seen anything like this?
It was novel, I'll give it that, but exactly pretty close to what you were saying. Now, what happened was Governor Raimondo got a legal opinion. She paid over $40,000 taxpayer dollars for it, that said if the Supreme Court allows states to institute sports betting, it is legal under the Rhode Island Constitution. And based on that, as you said before, the Supreme Court did show, she put, actually it was $29 million, the numbers you said are, I think, correct, that would be for the total of all gambling revenue. But $29 million in the budget for this, hoping that before the legislature passed the budget at the end of June, they'd have the federal right to do it, and then rely on this legal opinion for the state right, and then just get it through the House and Senate and put it in the budget. Never been done before that I've ever heard of, but that's how this all happened.
Now, again, we're not interested, well, tonight at least, in discussing the economic impact of gaming, the any of the peripheral, any of the discussions that you can almost whip up in an instant over casino gaming. This is strictly a constitutional issue. I have not seen a rush of emotion from anyone other than a handful of folks like yourself and myself over these issues, and no one really besides yourself, at least publicly, who has operated at the level you have in Rhode Island state government. Is this private? I mean, I'm not looking for any names, but are people privately raising concern over this? I mean,
you raised a big problem, and one of the only things is that the other side is that we're not going to do anything with this except start sports betting, has turned out to be true. This issue, when I wrote the Providence Journal, has been a longer one on Twitter. I tweeted out. It was brought to the governor's attention. It was brought to the attorney general's attention. It was brought by representatives in Tiverton and Lincoln to the leadership of the House and Senate attention, and they all came back and said the same thing. No one cares. There's no voters care. This is a non-issue. They waved this erroneous legal opinion around, and they said we're not going to ask for an advisory opinion. Never mind put it on the ballot. Even though all we need to do is put it on the ballot in stated, and we can go forward and not lose a penny. They just said no one's going to raise it. No one cares. Even if Lawrence was right, it's not going to make it to court because we haven't seen anybody outside of a handful of people even mention this issue.
Right.
And in trying to get people to care about it, if you put it correctly, this constitutional issue, as I put it, it's a very important process issue in the Constitution. It just falls on deaf ears. And I think the WPRO I talked to, who I was on, one of them on set last week, said it the best. He said in the old days, we had groups like Operation Clean Government, Common Cause, these good government groups screaming holy murder if the Constitution was blatantly violated a good government provision. And they're all, so what? They're all silent on this one today, which I think is sad. Because the Constitution here is very clearly being violated, and nobody really wants to raise this issue in the courts.
Right. And I personally have promised you that I'm going to do my best for my tiny little seat here in the body politic to make this an issue, because constitutions matter. If a governor, and I'm not, and again, for the record tonight at least, I'm not looking to personalize or vilify anyone right now. I'm trying to keep it in the abstract. If a governor can use public relations, the overwhelming force of public relations, and a late night sleight of hand to nullify a constitution with something that for many people will seem innocuous, the so often spoken of slippery slope is now alive and well here in Rhode Island. What else can be done in the dead of night? And where is the outrage? You know, to me, there's, again, without getting into all the side issues, there's real harm here. But most importantly, it's process. And process matters. Because ultimately, when we try to fight other issues later on, will that same lack of collective will, that sort of shrugging of the shoulders take place? Like, oh, you know, it's gaming. You know, and inevitably what will drive me nuts as a libertarian is so many people will root for the state to collect more revenue, and that will be their rationalization to ignore a process that was put in place specifically to force a discussion of this. The process in this case is not in place to either, in and of itself, validify, demonize, or comment on the issue. The process exists so that the body politic can have that discussion and debate and ultimately come to a consensus. I think it's fair to say that you and I agree with this process issue, that if it had been properly brought up to a vote, or is brought up to a vote and is passed, then we are satisfied. Fair statement.
And the sad part is, Pat, is that the people who don't care right now are saying, we all know it's passed, so what's the harm? Why raise it? And to people who care about the Constitution, the answer is, that's exactly backwards. If it's going to pass anyway, have the debate, get it on the ballot, pass it, and you will follow the Constitution in the process, and everybody will be happy.
Right. And which could have easily been done. This was not a year full of, I mean, there was the usual money grab by the state. This was not a year full of a midterm election. It was not full of compelling major issues per se. You had the prospect of a well-attended gubernatorial election, which would, I think, have brought out, you know, there was enough of a voting surge, if you will, well, relatively speaking, where that the imprimatur of the people, either in opposing, rejecting, or approving, would have really carried a great deal of weight. And yet this, why do they, rhetorical question for the ages, why do they do these things, Joe? You know, you've been in the meetings.
Well, I think they, and again, I know right now, despite Pat and Joe and a few others, they were right. They basically were doing a Clint Eastwood, looked at the people who said this is a process issue in the Constitution, and said, go ahead, make my dad. Sue. Nobody's going to sue. Nobody's going to sue. Nobody cares. And since nobody cares, we're not going to spend any time on political capital to ask the Supreme Court for an advisory opinion, especially when they kind of know what they're likely to say if they read my op-ed, And we're certainly not going to risk anything and put it on the ballot in November. And since we see the chance of this ever going to court at between slim and none, go ahead, make our day. And that's why they did it. And we're sitting here in December with sports betting happening, and unfortunately, they're right so far. And it's sad.
So what has to happen now? You know, you and I spoke offline, and these are not inexpensive processes, are they? What's involved in an issue like this where you don't have voter initiative? Not that it would help, but what's involved in mounting legal opposition to this?
Well, we need some plaintiffs who voted in 2012 and 2016, whether they voted for or against the expansion of gambling doesn't matter. And we need some decent amount of money. I would say maybe 1/50th to 1/100th of what they'll spend. And when they'll spend $1 million on this thing at the drop of a hat, we just need a reasonable amount of money to pay some fees and the cost of going to litigation, and we can mount this challenge in Superior Court and get it all the way to the Supreme Court.
Right, because they will fight it to that, won't they?
No, fight. They will fight. They will have the council that issued the advisory opinion. They'll have representation for the governor. They'll have the lottery commission will have its own counsel. IGT, who's doing the sports betting, will have their own counsel. These will be some of the top lawyers in the state. All spending with unlimited budgets for unlimited dollars, Pat, because there's $10, $20, $30 million a year to the other side each year at stake here. If we strike this down. And now again, it's only a stake in terms of a bonus question. Unless they're fearful that might not last, but they don't want this stopped even for a day. There's at least millions of dollars at stake if we prevail and require this to go down. They're going to spend an unlimited amount of money. Now that's okay. They did the same thing when I fought the privately operated Harris Casino some 16 years ago and won. I went up against everybody. That's fine. We won. You can't have privately operated casinos in the state of Rhode Island. Nobody knew that before we brought the case. And frankly, as I thought that case wasn't too difficult to win, this case is even easier. This is even clearer that there's no way sports betting was anywhere near that ballot and was approved by any voter because they had no notice that that illegal game was involved in 2012 and 2016.
So I want to stress you are unequivocal in your belief that clearly it was not the because one of the arguments I've heard, and again my legal training extends to watching hundreds of Law and Order episodes. There are some in the public theater that will argue that this meant new locations. It didn't mean, sports betting versus this versus that. It meant if in fact they try to move the casino somewhere, that's what it meant. What is your response to that?
Well, that's not even that argument. Let me just tell you what actually is agreed to between us and the other side. The other side issued a 30-page or so legal opinion on the entire topic, which I read and rebutted in 3 pages. But here's what's agreed to. That sports betting absolutely is an expansion of gambling. There was no dispute over that. It wasn't a location issue. That's a different constitutional requirement. That's a separate one, not an issue. Mm-hmm. The issue with this case is a new type of gambling. And the state, the lottery commission, and Joe Larissa all agree that sports betting is a new type of gambling. Where we disagree is that they believe the referendum questions in 2012 and 2016, which were applicable to Newport and Tiverton, and which said and approved casino gaming, including table games, that those words included sports betting. And the voter information book, which talked about Indian gaming and having to go to statutes to define Class 3 gaming, and then looking in the Code of Federal Regulations, which talks about sports betting, again, nowhere near the ballot question and nowhere near the explanation, was valid voter approval of this expansion into sports betting. Excuse me. So they agreed that it needed approval. They just said, got it. And
So the next step then is obviously some type of crowdsourcing. Here's the sad irony, is that in a very real case, because again, no expert, but your logic is impeccable here. State tax revenue will be used to pay for, at a high level, an egregious violation, or the defense of an egregious violation of a state constitution. And the state, to a large degree, and this is, when I look at the role of an attorney general, when I look at the role of counsel for the legislature, counsel for the governor, the state will be effectively working against the interests, if you will, of the state. And
I can make your argument even stronger in the outrage path. That taxpayer money will be used up to, and I'm probably not going to be that far off, $1 billion to stop this question from going on the ballot. The citizens who have to bring the case will spend, again, a very tiny fraction of that. If we win, the citizens' attorney's fees won't be reimbursed. Yet the taxpayers, including those who brought the case, will have their money being used to defend a violation of the Constitution, keeping the question from the very voters who are paying the fees to try to keep it off the ballot.
And there is really no way to seek relief from that, is there?
No, under federal law and federal court, neither of which we're under, if the government violates the Constitution and a group of plaintiffs sues and is correct, the attorney's fees are paid for by the state. So at least the prosecution and the other side both have their fees paid for. And state court is involved on this one.
Right.
We just get $1 million spent against us, and then we don't get reimbursed.
Right.
If it went away.
So, I mean, and you went down a list of people, and I'm not looking to indict anyone for their involvement or lack of involvement, but on the casino gaming in general, because of the mad chase we're all under to get more money and more money for a voracious government, there are a lot of people willing to rationalize their silence, for lack of a better term. Is this something that, if the funding were available, I'm not going to try and put you on the spot here, but is this something you could see being involved with, or you see no attorneys who are willing to be involved with, if in fact there's some level of funding there?
Well, I've let it be known for a while now. I can use it. I'm ready to go. And I'll do it at a greatly. I just can't do it for nothing.
Right. I mean,
never mind take money out of my own pocket to fight this fight.
Right. I mean, you have a business and a family.
Yeah. Some good citizens to step up to the plate and donate something, so that we can make this happen. And again, it will be small sources of what the other side is going to spend on this. But I think some people are interested in donating a small amount of money so we can fight this tomorrow.
All right. Well, I mean, the challenge is there. Again, as I reflect on this, I look at, and I'm not going to mention names, but I look at all the usual suspects who are upset about a whole lot of things, usually legitimately, their willingness to step away from this. Have you heard any legitimate numbers as to what they think they're actually going to make this year?
On the sports betting?
Yeah.
I think they're still expecting it to be $20 million or so from sports betting.
Now, again,
in the fiscal year ending July.
Now, to clarify, and this is what I'm obviously confused on, is that, let's just say $30 million, a round number, right? Take $1 million here, $1 million there. What's the old line? After a while, we're talking real money.
Yeah.
So, is that $30 million the state's cut of it, or is that what their expectation for the total sports betting will be?
It was, I believe, in this fiscal year's budget, $29 million if they started on October 1. We all know they did not start October 1. They started the Monday after Thanksgiving, the last week. Mm-hmm. So that would already be cut down. But let's assume it's 25 number now. That is the state case. would be bent because the state is getting somewhere a little bit more than 50% of the total losses on that sports betting.
Wow. What?
Yeah.
I mean, Lincoln Almond was a warrior on this issue. I mean, is there any sense how he would feel about this?
Oh, I'm sure he'd be on the side of requiring a referendum. In fact, that's on the day Lincoln Almond was elected was the very day, the very same vote underneath his name that the expansion of new types of gambling requirements went into the Constitution. Same day. And so, yeah, we fought many a battle on this against Indian gaming all throughout his term. And in fact, the separation of powers was done by Lincoln Almond when the Lottery Commission voted to expand video lottery terminals on a commission dominated by legislators, which violated separation of powers. But that's another story for another time. So yeah, I'm sure as a process matter, he would be with us.
Interesting. All right, my friend. Well,
Let me ask something, Pat,
Sure.
that's actually quite important. For those out there who say, oh, it's only sports betting, we'll let this one slide. And I'm not going to mention any names, but you'd be surprised at the people who think that way. The very same people who are fighting gung-ho to stop a casino coming in here, who are not willing to wade into this battle, we'll wait for the next one. Well, guess what, my friend? The next one is here. It's already here. It didn't take long. This is sports betting. At least it doesn't involve new locations. This is in Tiverton, and this is in Lincoln. Nobody's disputing that you have to go to the facility, just like if you were playing the video lottery tournament or the new table games, blackjack or roulette. You go there to play bet.
right.
Senate President Dominic Ruggiero said last year that, well, of course, if we put this on the internet, so you could bet anywhere around your home, your bed, your cars, your house, your home. That would be an expansion requiring the people approve that. Since nobody is challenging this sports betting, I don't think he has that position anymore. Last week he talked about introducing legislation this year, coming up in a month, that will put sports betting on every iPhone and an Android device in the state, and you can rummage it around and you can play sports bets from anywhere. And since sports betting is not challenged and it's already legal, I believe the thought is, hey, if we can do that, what's the difference between doing it on a computer or iPhone? The bets are all going to be electronically transmitted to Twin River in Lincoln or Twin River in Tiverton. It's the same thing as going there. It's not a new type of gaming. The slippery slope is not hypothetical, Pat. It has arrived.
Oof. Yikes.
Oh, we have to stop this now.
Right.
We can't let sports betting about Google violate the Constitution, or we're going to have sports betting on the internet and on phones be that little small step away. And if this is legal, or if we let this go, then they're just going to argue that this is such a small step for the sports betting that already exists. Basically, it's a digital wire or through the air to the casino. That's going to be legal. And then the next step, all sports, all gambling on iPhones and computers is going to be legal. All statewide. Although we have this amendment passed by the people that says any new type of gambling has to go to the voters, and if a new municipality, the gambling is legal, it has to go to the voters. Yet unless we nip this in the bud, we're going to have Tiverton and Lincoln, the Twin River casinos, being played on everybody's iPhone, everybody's computer, and everybody's device, on all 39 municipalities in the state of Rhode Island, and there's not going to be any case to try to stop it. And that's a scary thought. And frankly, Tom, this is the exact reason why in 1994 the people put this constitutional amendment in, to stop it and say, if you want to expand the community, if you want to expand the types, you can do it, but you've got to do it with the voters.
Is there a shelf life to the opposition of this? And what do I mean by that? You know, again, my armchair expertise here, you know, one worries that if a behavior is allowed to continue, is there such a point in time when the practitioners of said behavior, in this case, the State of Rhode Island Lottery Commission or whoever, all right, can claim economic distress if it's been in place for a certain period of time? What is the shelf life on being able to fight this?
Well, I would have preferred to have, a case in the courts at the time this happened, or actually even before cast in stone, but there wasn't the appetite. I would say we've got a period of time in the next few months to do it. It's really not a shelf life economically that directly affects the court case. It's called a harm to the other side argument that why did you wait so long to bring it when you knew that the illegal activity was occurring,
right,
which could weigh against granting any kind of exemption. I don't think that we're right now, but if we waited too long, I think that could come into play.
All right, that's what I worry about. So there you have it. We've got to, as we say, make history or be history on this. We as a state can assert our rights under our Constitution, or we can just allow the state to just, what's the term, trample willy-nilly any of these protected behaviors that we have. Well, I'm going to give it a shot. You know, I'm going to reach out to people this week, and it's going to be some of the people that you and I talked about, and give them the old, what's up? How did we get here? Well, why was this allowed to happen? You know, I don't see anything nefarious in any of these folks. I worry that there's a collective exhaustion on fighting fights by the hardcore activist cadre, if you will. And, you know, and part of that, I saw that firsthand in opposing. I was involved in the opposition to stadium subsidies. And I saw at the end a lot of people who consider themselves, you know, anti-corporate welfare, bail at the last minute under pressure from House leadership. And these are people who are right now say that they are opposed to House leadership. Again, I'm not here to comment on individual political situations, but I just wonder if there is some sort of collective exhaustion. And the problem is that once that becomes clear, as you point out, that there is no more, you know, we know the names. There are people in the past who have been absolute warriors at great personal expense, you know, to their time and their family and their business prospects, who've been absolute warriors in this. But as you say, in a situation like this is not just simply setting up a petition or a Facebook page, you know, unless there's actual litigation involved. That's all that matters. Nothing else matters. They were allowed to go forward with opposition of a few well-intentioned people, and unfortunately, that seems to be the new MO for government. If you don't get and again, without naming names or political parties, keeping it clean tonight, but the new model for government seems to be, if I get elected, even by the thinnest of majorities, even if I don't even have a plurality, if I get elected, I'm just going to go hell-bent on my agenda, regardless of what, and act like I have a mandate, whether I have one or not. And that seems to be the new MO of government, you know, and it's affecting us at every level. Well, I thank you for coming on tonight. Again, I know you've had a hectic week, and you've got family commitments, and you know, I applaud your willingness to engage in all the investment you've made in terms of private time and professional guidance in this. And let's just see if we can get some people pissed off. How about that?
That's great, Matt. And the good news on this is, unlike the warriors who have had to spend substantial time, effort, capital, like you said, Facebook, web pages, rallying the troops, we just need one thing to make this happen, and not a lot of it. Money. That's it. Just a small amount of money from a small number of people, and let me go to work and do my thing and keep the plaintiffs informed. And I think we'll stop this. Constitution straight, and once this particular provision is cast in stone at the Supreme Court, it'll be the law of the land for the next 100 years. Pat, let me say that when I first pointed out that the Highlands Casino was unconstitutional, I was the only one who said the Constitution requires that all lotteries are run by the state. Why in the world would they let a Highlands Casino in here? Nobody knew that. Everyone disagreed with me. It was the plain language of the Constitution, but we won. And only state-operated casinos are legal. But since that time, there's been no question about it. Everyone's acted accordingly, and that provision is going to be protected until and unless the Constitution is amended. So if we can just get a small amount of money here to put in stone that you really can't expand the types of gambling without all your approval, we can be confident that that'll stick for a long, long time.
Excellent. Well, let's get to work. Let's see what we can do here.
Get to work.
All right, Joe. Joe, listen, thanks for joining us tonight. Joe Larissa, attorney extraordinaire, someone who's been fundamentally involved in government for a generation now, and someone who, as I like to say, hashtag, takes it very, very personally. Thank you again, Joe. Folks, we're going to wrap things up a couple minutes early this week. It's been a hell of a night. You know, in reflection, we've had the Goldwater Institute talking about literally changing the way that the legal business is structured in this country. We had a great young candidate, of course I'm biased, Bill Hunt, who's talking about changing the way that an entire generation of political actors finance themselves. We went through, a half a dozen issues with Eric Bain from Reason Magazine, talking about plain truths about economics, about personal freedom, and self-ownership. And then in this last segment, we had a great conversation with Joe Larissa talking about, I believe, a real credible threat to our state constitution. Not just in the issue that we're on, but really, clearly, the cavalier attitude with which elected and self-appointed state leadership takes with regard to what is a clear constitutional provision. Their willingness to just screw right by, quite frankly, is appalling. I want to take this moment to thank our sponsors for this evening. Air Products. Air Sciences, excuse me. Air Products. Sorry, Daryl. Air Sciences, airsciences.net. Mold remediation, biohazard detection, and resolution in your home, your school, your office, really everywhere you and your family and friends and coworkers get together. A safer home, a safer office, a healthier life for everyone. Beacon Shipping and Logistics, beaconshippingandlogistics.com. Imagine an international player in the automobile shipping business, located right here in scenic Warwick, Rhode Island. 1-877-3-SHIP-IT. beaconshippingandlogistics.com. You know, this is the time of year you might have found that truck or vehicle somewhere in a different part of the country. Maybe you're sending the daughter back to college with a SUV from Aunt Joan. Maybe you found something on eBay Auto. Professional transportation, fully insured, fully licensed, right here in Warwick, Rhode Island. And of course, Rhode Island's boutique soda before we knew we needed boutique sodas. I'm talking about Yacht Club, yachtclubbottlingworks.com. I got to visit there this past week. It's one of the fun parts of this. Get to spend time with some of our sponsors. As John and his hardy crew are retooling the entire line. Great flavors. We're in the heart of the holiday season. You're going to have parties, family dinners. You go to so much trouble. So cook and prepare delicious foods, very often that are a reflection of your ethnic or religious origin. Or perhaps you're just someone who's just a great cook, like my wife. Why use the refinery soda? You're using the finest ingredients in your home products. We talk farm to table here in Rhode Island. We're blessed with the best seafood in the world. So don't drink the refinery soda. Yacht Club Bottling Works. Natural flavors, That harkened back to a time when ginger ale, well, tasted like ginger. My personal favorite, of course, is the root beer. Great, great root beer. That's what you should be treating yourself to this holiday season. Available now through statewide distribution. You can go to their facility in Centerdale, Rhode Island. It's right in the Rotary, right off of Route 44. Take a visit, get a little tour, see how the stuff is made, and they've got dozens of flavors right out there. Buy it by the case, buy a six-pack. You're supporting Rhode Island business, a great Rhode Island family. People who have been in the community now. This product has been on the shelves of stores in Rhode Island and restaurants for over 100 years. And what do I say about all our sponsors? It takes a special type of person to sponsor indie media. Controversial subjects, issues. This isn't Coffee Klatch Radio. Think about what we talked about tonight. These are businesses who take it very, very personally. And I hope you do too. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, and as always on the mighty, mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and our all anti-billionaire baseball boys club, apolitical baseball feed at Pawtucket is home. We'll be back next week.